Hello guys, welcome to Pika Fiction. So in this video, we will see what if Ash was betrayed by his friends and found comfort in Jessie's arms. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, The Shattered Crown. The air in Pallet Town tasted of sunlight and victory. It was a perfect Kanto afternoon, the kind that settled deep in your bones and reminded you of home. Laughter, sharp and bright, spilled from the open doors of Professor Oak's laboratory, mingling with the rich scent of Delia Ketchum's cooking and the sweet perfume of blooming flowers. Inside, the lab had been transformed. Research equipment was pushed against the walls, covered in festive streamers. A long table groaned under the weight of food, and Pokémon of every shape and size mingled with a crowd of familiar faces, a living tapestry of a decade-long journey. This was Ash Ketchum's homecoming, and his coronation. The Alola League trophy, a brilliant, sun-shaped sculpture of crystal and gold, sat in a place of honor, catching the light and dazzling the eye. But the real prize was this, the gathering of his family. Misty, her fiery hair tied back, was in a heated but friendly argument with Iris over the merits of water types versus dragon types. Brock, ever the responsible one, was helping Delia carry out a massive platter of sandwiches, his eyes briefly scanning the room for any pretty girls before snapping back to his task with a disciplined sigh. May and Dawn were huddled in a corner, excitedly showing each other their latest contest ribbons, their respective Piplup and Glamour preening nearby. Serena was talking quietly with Clement and Bonnie, a soft smile on her face as she watched Ash from across the room. Ash himself was the calm eye of the storm. He stood near the open doorway leading to the ranch, Pikachu a familiar, happy weight on his shoulder. He wasn't the frantic, hyperactive kid who had left this town so many years ago. There was a stillness to him now, an easy confidence that sat on him like a well-worn jacket. His victory in Alola hadn't just been a win, it had been a culmination. He'd finally climbed the mountain, and the view from the top was peace. Enjoying the party, champ? Ash turned. Gary Oak leaned against the doorframe, a smirk playing on his lips, but the old antagonism was gone, replaced by a genuine, if still competitive, respect. Can't complain, Ash said, a grin spreading across his face. Best part is, I didn't have to cook for it. Pikachu chirped in agreement, nibbling on a poffin that Dawn had given him. Pika pika. Gary chuckled, pushing himself off the frame. Don't get too comfortable. A champion's work is never done. People expect things. Speeches. Appearances. Exhibition matches. He gestured with his head toward the sprawling ranch behind the lab, where hundreds of Pokémon roamed. Speaking of which, I've been hearing a lot about that team of yours. Think they're up for one more round? For old time's sake. The suggestion hung in the air, crackling with unspoken history. It wasn't a challenge so much as an invitation, a chance to put a final, friendly exclamation point on their long and storied rivalry. The murmur of the party began to quiet as people caught the drift of the conversation. Eyes turned toward them. Ash's grin widened. You really want to lose to the Alola League champion in front of everyone, Gary? I want to see if the Alola League champion can handle a Kanto-style beating, Gary shot back, his smirk turning into a full-blown grin. The party erupted. A wave of excitement surged through the crowd as everyone, friends, family, and Pokémon alike, streamed out into the massive corral behind the lab. Professor Oak, his face beaming with academic and grandfatherly pride, quickly took on the role of referee. This will be a one-on-one exhibition match, he announced, his voice booming with nostalgic enthusiasm. A battle between two of Pallet Town's finest trainers. Are the challengers ready? Gary was already on one side of the makeshift battlefield, a patch of open dirt surrounded by a ring of eager spectators. He held a pokeball in his hand, his expression focused and sharp. Ready when you are, Ashy boy. Ash walked to his side, the crowd parting for him. He looked at Pikachu. What do you say, buddy? One more time. Choo! Pikachu's cheeks sparked, his little body thrumming with energy. He leaped from Ash's shoulder and landed nimbly on the field, a tiny bolt of yellow lightning against the brown earth. A wave of fond murmurs went through the crowd. Pikachu, of course. Misty said, crossing her arms. Classic. Gary's grin was predatory. Classic, maybe. But predictable. He tossed his Pokeball into the air. Blastoise, let's go. The ball burst open, and with a ground-shaking thud, the colossal shellfish Pokémon materialized. Its hardened shell gleamed, and the twin water cannons on its back swiveled with menacing purpose. It let out a deafening roar, a challenge that sent vibrations through the soil. The size difference was almost comical. Tiny Pikachu stared up at the mountain of muscle and shell, utterly unfazed. Blastoise, Hydro Pump. Gary commanded without hesitation. The cannons on Blastoise's back roared to life, unleashing two massive, high-pressure jets of water. They tore across the field, gouging trenches in the dirt. Pikachu, quick attack, dodge it. Ash yelled. Pikachu became a blur of yellow. He zipped left, then right, the water jets missing him by inches and slamming into the ground behind him, sending up plumes of mud and steam. He weaved between the twin torrents, closing the distance with incredible speed. Now, Iron Tail. As he ran, Pikachu's tail began to glow, hardening into a silvery, metallic sheen. He leaped, spinning through the air like a shuriken, and brought the glowing tail down in a powerful arc. It slammed into Blastoise's head with a resonant clang. Blastoise grunted, stumbling back a step, but shook its head, clearly annoyed more than injured. It'll take more than that, Ash. Gary countered. Rapid spin. Blastoise withdrew into its shell and began to spin, becoming a whirling dervish of destruction. It shot across the field, deflecting Pikachu's follow-up thunderbolt with its spinning shell and bearing down on him. Pikachu, into the air. Use the shell. Ash commanded. It was a classic, almost instinctive maneuver. Just as the spinning shell was about to hit him, Pikachu jumped, planting his feet on the whirling surface. He used its momentum to launch himself high into the sky, soaring dozens of feet into the air. Perfect. Ash's eyes gleamed with strategic fire. Volt Tackle. Pikachu became enveloped in a crackling shroud of golden electricity. He tucked into a ball and descended like a meteor, a living thunderbolt aimed directly at the stationary Blastoise, who had just emerged from its shell. Not so fast. Gary yelled, a triumphant look on his face. Skull Bash. Blastoise's head and neck glowed with a white energy. It tilted its head down, then shot it upward with incredible force, meeting Pikachu's descent head-on. The explosion was immense. Electricity and physical force collided in a blinding flash of light and a deafening boom that shook the entire ranch. When the light faded, Pikachu was sent flying backward, landing hard near Ash's feet, sparks sputtering weakly from his body. Blastoise stood its ground, smoking and bruised, but still very much in the fight. The crowd gasped. It was a perfectly executed counter. Pikachu, you okay? Ash asked, kneeling down. Pika. Pikachu struggled to his feet, shaking his head, but he was clearly winded. Brock whistled, impressed. Gary's not playing around. He predicted the Volt Tackle and had the Skull Bash charged and ready. Ash is in a tough spot, Clement added, his glasses glinting. Pikachu's speed is his main advantage, but Blastoise's defense is just too high. Ash looked at Pikachu, then back at the indomitable Blastoise. A slow smile spread across his face. He wasn't frustrated, he was thrilled. This was what he lived for. He stood up and gave Pikachu a gentle pat. Great job, buddy. Take a rest. Pikachu, knowing the look in Ash's eyes, nodded and scampered back to the sidelines, taking a spot next to a concerned Serena. Ash reached for a Pokeball on his belt. The crowd leaned in, buzzing with anticipation. Who would it be? Charizard? Sceptile? Alright, let's turn up the heat. Ash shouted, throwing the ball. Infernape, I choose you. The flame Pokémon burst forth in a blaze of glory. It landed in a crouch, its fists clenched, the fiery crown on its head burning with intense, brilliant light. It let out a challenging cry, a sound of pure fighting spirit, and punched its fists together, sending a shower of embers into the air. Gary's eyes narrowed. An interesting choice. Fire against water. Bold. We've overcome worse type disadvantages, Ash said, his voice ringing with confidence. Infernape, Mach Punch. Infernape was a streak of orange and white. It crossed the field in an instant, its fist glowing with fighting energy. The punch landed squarely in Blastoise's gut with a sickening thud. The massive Pokémon staggered, a grunt of real pain escaping its lips. Don't let it breathe. Gary ordered. Hydro Pump. Flare Blitz. Ash roared at the same time. Infernape became a living comet, cloaking itself in a spiraling vortex of brilliant blue-white fire. It charged forward, meeting the powerful jets of water head-on. Fire and water met in a spectacular, violent explosion of steam that momentarily obscured the entire battlefield. The hissing sound was deafening. For a moment, the two opposing forces were locked in a stalemate, a churning cloud of pressurized vapor. Then, with a triumphant roar, Infernape burst through the steam cloud, still wreathed in flame. It was smoking, the fire sizzling from the water, but it was undeterred. It slammed into Blastoise's chest, and the resulting explosion of fire and force was cataclysmic. Blastoise was lifted off its feet and thrown backward, crashing into the ground with a tremor that shook the spectators. But the flare blitz came at a cost. Infernape landed, its body sparking with recoil damage, its breathing heavy. It's on its last legs, Blastoise. Finish it with Skull Bash. Gary yelled, seeing his opening. Blastoise, bruised and furious, pushed itself to its feet. Its head began to glow with power as it charged forward, a living battering ram. Ash's eyes were locked on the scene, his mind racing. Infernape was too tired to dodge, too damaged to take the hit. It was over. A normal trainer would have accepted the loss. But Ash wasn't a normal trainer. He felt it then, a familiar hum, a thrum of energy that lived just beneath his skin. It was his aura, the life force that connected him to all things, especially his Pokémon. He'd learned to use it, to sense with it, to communicate with it. In moments of extreme duress, he could even lend his strength through it. He closed his eyes, focusing, pushing. Get up, Infernape. One more time. For us. He felt the connection, a warm thread of energy linking his heart to Infernape's. He saw through Infernape's eyes, the charging Blastoise, the exhaustion, the burning will to fight. He felt the Pokémon's determination, its blaze ability flaring to life as its health dwindled. And he poured his own energy into it. The fiery crown on Infernape's head didn't just burn brighter, it erupted. The flames grew to an impossible size, turning from orange to a piercing, ethereal blue. The ground at its feet began to crackle and glow. The spectators stared, mouths agape. What is that? Dawn breathed. I've never seen its blaze ability do that before. Brock's eyes were wide with something between awe and alarm. That's not just Blaze. That's Ash. On the field, time seemed to slow down. Ash's vision was tunneled, locked onto his Pokémon. He could feel the power surging, not just from him to Infernape, but from something deeper. A wellspring of energy, vast and ancient, was opening up inside him. It was a roaring ocean where before there had only been a river. It was exhilarating. And it was terrifying. Blastoise was only feet away, its skull bash about to connect. Now. Ash screamed, the word torn from his throat. Infernape let out a roar that was not its own. It was deeper, more primal. It didn't move to dodge. It reared back and threw a punch. It wasn't Mach punch or fire punch. It was just a punch, but it was backed by a tsunami of raw, untamed power. The air itself seemed to shatter. For a single, silent moment, the world went white. There was no sound, only an overwhelming pressure that made everyone's ears pop and their hearts seize in their chests. The very color seemed to drain from the landscape, replaced by a blinding, colorless luminescence originating from Ash. He was a silhouette against a sun gone nova. A wave of pure force, visible as a distortion in the air like heat haze, erupted from him, not from Infernape, but from him. It wasn't an attack. It was just, release. It swept over the battlefield in an instant. It didn't touch Blastoise or Infernape. It struck the ground between them. The earth didn't just crack. It splintered. A spiderweb of deep fissures raced outwards from a central point, glowing with a soft, blue light. The very soil seemed to groan, and a section of the field the size of a small house simply collapsed inward, creating a new, shallow crater. The trees at the edge of the ranch bent away as if struck by a phantom hurricane. The windows of the lab rattled violently in their frames. Every Pokémon on the ranch, from the smallest Caterpie to the largest Tauros, fell silent and cowered. Every person in the crowd froze, a primal, instinctive fear gripping them. It wasn't the fear of an attack. It was the chilling, mind-numbing awe one feels in the presence of something impossibly, fundamentally powerful. A god. Or something that could break one. Then, as quickly as it came, it was over. The light vanished. The pressure subsided. Sound rushed back in, seeming unnaturally loud. Silence. A profound, ringing silence broken only by the whistling wind and the panicked chirping of distant Pidgey. Infernape stood panting, its amplified flame receding to its normal size, looking just as bewildered as everyone else. A few yards away, Blastoise had skidded to a halt, its skull bash aborted, its eyes wide with shock, staring not at Infernape, but at the impossible crater that had just appeared. And Ash. Ash was on one knee, his head bowed, gasping for air. His body trembled, not from fatigue, but from the aftershock of the power that had just surged through him. He felt hollowed out, scoured clean. He looked up, his vision swimming, and saw the faces of his friends. He saw the one thing he never expected to see there. Fear. Not concern, not surprise. Pure, unadulterated fear. Misty's face was pale, her hand covering her mouth. Brock's expression wasn't analytical, it was the look of a doctor who had just witnessed a symptom of an incurable, world-ending disease. Serena's smile was gone, replaced by wide, terrified eyes. Clement was muttering about impossible energy readings, his hands shaking. No one moved. No one spoke. The joyous party atmosphere had been atomized, replaced by a thick, suffocating tension. The trophy, still gleaming on the table inside, seemed like a relic from another lifetime. Delia was the first to move, rushing to his side, her face a mask of worry. Ash. Honey, are you all right? What was that? Ash couldn't answer. He pushed himself to his feet, looking around at the circle of friends who now seemed like strangers. They weren't looking at him, they were looking through him, at the power he had just unleashed. It was Brock who finally broke the silence. His voice was low, steady, and terrifyingly calm. It was the voice he used for emergencies, devoid of all warmth. Ash, he said, taking a step forward. What was that? I don't know, Ash stammered, his own voice sounding foreign to him. I just wanted to help Infernape. Help him? Iris's voice was sharp, accusatory. You nearly leveled the whole ranch. What if you couldn't control it? What if one of us had been standing there? But no one was hurt, Ash protested, his confusion turning to a desperate plea for understanding. I would never, you don't know that, Misty cut in, her voice trembling but firm. She took a step to stand beside Brock, forming a united front. You can't know that. That thing, it wasn't a Pokemon move, Ash. It came from you. It was too big. Too strong. The others began to close in, their expressions a mixture of fear and grim resolve. It felt like the walls were closing in. We saw what happened in the Kalos crisis with the giant rock, Clement said, adjusting his glasses, his voice shaking. Uncontrolled Zygarde energy. This felt stronger. The energy readings are off the scale. It's not safe, Ash. For you, or for anyone around you. Every word was a hammer blow. These were his friends, his family. And they were talking about him like he was a problem to be solved. A weapon to be disarmed. What are you saying? Ash asked, his voice barely a whisper. Brock's eyes were filled with a terrible, misplaced pity. We think you need help, Ash. Professional help. The League has facilities, specialists who can understand this condition. He took another step forward, his hands held up in a placating gesture. We need you to come with us. Willingly. Come with you where? To a secure facility, Misty said, the words falling like stones. Until they can figure out what's wrong with you. The implication was clear. A prison. A cage. Ash took a step back, shaking his head in disbelief. Pikachu, sensing the shift, leaped onto his shoulder, growling protectively at the closing circle, his cheeks sparking with defiant electricity. And your Pokemon, Brock added, his voice hardening slightly. They need to be kept safe, too. Away from your influence. We'll ask Professor Oak to hold them here, in the lab. That was it. That was the line. The thought of being separated from Pikachu, from Infernape, from all the partners who were his real family, it was unthinkable. A raw, protective fury surged through him, eclipsing the confusion and hurt. No, Ash said, his voice flat and cold. The boy was gone. In his place was the champion, the survivor of 100 impossible battles. You're not taking my Pokemon. And you're not taking me. A sad, resigned look passed between Brock and Misty. It was the look of people who had hoped for the best but prepared for the worst. We didn't want it to come to this, Ash, Brock said softly. He reached for a pokeball on his belt. But we can't take that risk. In a horrifying, surreal moment, they all did. Misty, May, Dawn, Iris, Sylvan, Clement. Pokeballs appeared in their hands. The friends he had journeyed with, eaten with, laughed with, and fought alongside. They were preparing to fight him. Don't do this, Ash warned, his voice a low growl. It's for your own good, May said, her voice pleading, even as she threw her ball. Blaziken, stand by. One by one, they emerged. Blaziken. Gyarados. Dragonite. Pangoro. The field was suddenly filled with powerful Pokemon, but they weren't facing an opponent. They were facing their trainer's oldest friend. Ash stood frozen, his heart shattering into a million pieces. He saw Brock's Onix, its familiar, craggy face now set in a posture of aggression. He saw Misty's Staryu, its red gem glowing with offensive light. He saw their faces, the faces of his friends, twisted by fear into the masks of jailers. He didn't want to fight them. The thought was a violation of everything he was. But the thought of letting them take him, cage him, strip him of his family, that was worse. Pikachu's growl deepened. They hurt you, the feeling came through their bond, fierce and loyal. We fight. Ash's jaw tightened. His decision was made in that instant, born of heartbreak and necessity. He was not a victim. He was a trainer. Charizard, I choose you, he roared, throwing his Pokeball high into the air. With a deafening shriek, the massive fire dragon appeared, his loyalty to Ash absolute and unquestionable. He landed with a ground-shaking thud, surveyed the scene, saw the Pokémon arrayed against them, and let out a bellowing plume of flame into the sky, a declaration of war. "What are you doing, Ash?" his mother, Delia, screamed from the sidelines, tears streaming down her face. Professor Oak stood beside her, his face ashen, looking utterly lost. Ash didn't answer. He couldn't. He leaped onto Charizard's back. "Pikachu, hold on tight. We're not letting you leave." Brock yelled. "Onyx, use bind." The giant rock snake shot forward, but Charizard was already taking to the air. "Gyarados, Dragon Rage." Misty commanded, her face a storm of conflicting emotions. A ball of draconic energy shot toward them. "Charizard, Flamethrower." Ash yelled. A torrent of fire met the attack mid-air, creating another concussive blast. Ash didn't fight to win. He fought to escape. The battle was a chaotic, desperate series of evasions and deflections. Blaziken's high jump kick was dodged. Dragonite's ice beam was melted by another blast of fire. He saw it all in flashes. The determined face of May. The tearful resolve of Dawn. The cold logic in Clement's eyes. These images burned themselves into his memory, each one another crack in his soul. He wasn't just fighting their Pokémon, he was fighting the memories they had all built together. "We need to create an opening," he yelled to his Pokémon over the roar of wind and attacks. "Charizard, fly straight up. Pikachu, get ready." Charizard angled his wings and shot vertically into the sky, a powerful updraft from his wings kicking up a massive cloud of dust from the dry field. Below, the Pokémon and trainers were momentarily blinded. "Now, Pikachu. The biggest thunderbolt you've ever used. Aim for the whole field." Pikachu understood. It wasn't an attack meant to harm. It was a diversion. He leaped from Charizard's back, and as he fell, he unleashed a cataclysmic bolt of lightning. It didn't strike a single target but branched out, striking the ground all around the assembled Pokémon, creating a blinding flash and a deafening crack of thunder that forced everyone to shield their eyes. In that one moment of chaos, Charizard Dove caught Pikachu, and leveled out, flying low and fast, away from the lab, away from Pallet Town. Away from everything he had ever known. The last thing he heard was his mother's voice, a single, heartbroken cry of his name, carried on the wind. Ash. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The storm hit an hour later, a furious squall of wind and rain that seemed to mirror the tempest in his soul. Charizard, exhausted, had been forced to land in a dense, dripping forest miles from civilization. Ash had recalled him, murmuring his thanks to the loyal Pokémon, and now he was alone. Or, not quite alone. He huddled at the base of a massive, ancient oak tree, trying to find some meager shelter from the driving rain. The world was a blur of gray sheets of water and the thrashing of wind-tossed leaves. He was soaked to the bone, shivering, a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature seeping into his very marrow. In his lap, wrapped in his drenched jacket, was Pikachu. The massive thunderbolt had drained him completely. He was weak, shivering, his breathing shallow. Ash held him close, trying to shield him from the worst of the downpour, his own body a poor, trembling barrier. The betrayal replayed in his mind, a torturous loop. Brock's calm, clinical voice. Misty's fearful eyes. The sight of their Pokémon turning on him. His mother's cry. It was a wound deeper than any physical injury he had ever sustained. They hadn't just turned on him. They had tried to erase him, to pack him away like a dangerous object. The boy who had saved the world a dozen times over, now treated like its greatest threat. A sob caught in his throat, hot and sharp. He choked it down, his knuckles white as he clutched his jacket tighter around his partner. He wouldn't cry. He couldn't. Crying was a luxury he no longer had. He was a champion without a home. A hero turned outcast. A friend to all, who now had no friends. He was just Ash Ketchum, a boy in a forest, holding his last, most loyal companion, with the whole world hunting him. The weight of it all was crushing, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly, utterly alone. A twig snapped nearby. His head shot up, his body instantly tense. He laid a protective hand over Pikachu, his eyes scanning the dark, rain-slicked woods. Elite Patrol. Had they found him already? A figure emerged from behind a thicket of ferns, and Ash's heart sank. Of course. It couldn't possibly get any worse. The flamboyant, impossibly long magenta hair was unmistakable, even plastered to her head by the rain. She wore the tattered remains of her white uniform, now smudged with mud and dirt. Behind her, a man with equally damp, lavender hair and a small, bipedal Pokémon struggled to keep up. Jessie. James. Meowth. They stopped a few feet away, looking just as miserable and waterlogged as he felt. For a moment, no one spoke, the only sound the drumming of rain on leaves. Ash braced himself for the inevitable. The motto. The gloating. The ridiculous, clumsy attempt to snatch Pikachu. He didn't have the strength for it. But it didn't come. Jessie just stood there, her arms crossed, shivering slightly. Her usual dramatic makeup was running down her face, making her look tired and surprisingly human. Her eyes weren't filled with greedy ambition. They were just, watching him. Well, she said, her voice low and stripped of its usual theatrical flair. Look what the storm dragged in. Ash didn't respond. He just stared, waiting for the other shoe to drop. James and Meowth came up beside her. Meowth shook the water from his fur, grumbling. Can we get out of this rain already, Jessie? My whiskers are getting droopy. Jessie ignored him. Her gaze was fixed on Ash. She saw the way he was hunched over, the protective curl of his body. She saw the state of Pikachu, barely moving in his lap. She saw the tear tracks on his face, mingling with the rain. She saw the profound, soul-deep exhaustion in his eyes. The look of someone whose entire world had just been burned to the ground. And in that moment, she didn't see the twerp. She didn't see the perennial winner or the guardian of the all-powerful Pikachu. She saw a kid. A lost, heartbroken kid, alone in a storm. And something in her, something she thought had been extinguished by years of failure and frustration, stirred. A flicker of empathy. Of recognition. The world had chewed her up and spat her out more times than she could count. She knew what that look felt in her own bones. Her posture softened. The sarcastic smirk on her face faded, replaced by something unreadable. She uncrossed her arms and took a half-step forward. He looks half-drowned, she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. Then, her eyes met Ash's again. She didn't reach for Pikachu. She didn't launch into a monologue. She simply unbuttoned her own jacket, a flimsy, inadequate shield against the storm, and held one side of it open. Get in here, twerp, she said, her voice quiet but rough. You're getting your Pokémon soaked. Ash stared at her, utterly bewildered. He looked from her outstretched jacket to her face. There was no trickery in her eyes. No hidden agenda he could detect. Just a simple, blunt, and impossible offer of shelter. Of comfort. He looked down at Pikachu, who let out a weak, pained squeak. The rain was relentless. They were both shaking uncontrollably. He could feel the last of his own strength failing. He had nowhere else to go. No one else to turn to. The friends he had trusted were hunting him. The only people offering him a sliver of kindness were his sworn enemies. The absurdity of it was staggering. The world had turned completely upside down. Slowly, hesitantly, driven by a primal need for warmth and a flicker of desperate hope, Ash pushed himself to his feet. Cradling Pikachu carefully, he took a stumbling step forward, then another, until he was standing in front of her. He ducked under the offered section of her jacket, huddling close. Her uniform was damp and smelled of rain and ozone, but it blocked the worst of the wind. A tiny pocket of shared warmth began to form between them. She didn't say anything else. She just stood there, holding the jacket over him and his Pokémon, a silent, temporary shield against the storm, both outside and in. Chapter 2, Embers in the Ash. The jacket was a flimsy thing, thin and already damp, but the simple act of another person blocking the wind was a shock to Ash's system. He stood huddled against Jessie, the rain drumming on the fabric just inches from his head. He could smell the faint, cheap perfume she always wore, now mixed with the scent of wet earth and ozone. It was surreal. For a dizzying moment, he felt a hysterical laugh bubbling in his chest. Hunted by his friends, saved by Team Rocket. The world had gone mad. Pikachu shivered in his arms, a small, weak tremor that cut through Ash's paralysis. He needed to get his partner warm. Now. James, who had been standing back with a look of utter bewilderment, seemed to shake himself into action. "Jessie, we can't just stand here. We'll all catch our death." He pointed a wavering finger toward a dark shape looming in the deluge. "There's a cave, an overhang in that rock face." Jessie didn't look at him, her attention still on the strange, silent truce she had brokered. "Well, don't just stand there gawking, get a fire started." Her voice, though still rough, lacked its usual biting edge. It was the command of a weary leader, not a dramatic villain. The three of them began to move, a bizarre and disjointed procession. Jessie kept the jacket held over Ash as they shuffled toward the rock face, the ground sucking at their boots. James and Meowth scrambled ahead. The cave was little more than a deep gouge in the stone, a rocky lip providing just enough cover to keep the direct rain off them. It was dark, damp, and smelled of moss and cold stone, but it was better than nothing. James immediately began rummaging in his pack, pulling out a waterproof pouch with a practiced efficiency that surprised Ash. From it, he produced a fire starter and a small bundle of dry tinder. "Useless twerp can at least make himself useful," Meowth grumbled, though his voice lacked any real venom. He nudged Ash's leg with his head. "The little guy. Your jacket's soaked. Gimme." Ash flinched, instinctively pulling Pikachu closer. Meowth rolled his eyes, a world-weary gesture. "Relax, I ain't gonna nab him. But fur dries fur. And my magnificent coat is only slightly damp." He began to groom himself with his tongue, his rough pink appendage working like a towel. Jessie watched the silent standoff, then sighed, a puff of white in the cold air. "He's right, twerp. Your jacket is just making him colder." The logic was undeniable. With a reluctance that felt like a physical tearing, Ash gently unwrapped his partner from his soaked jacket and handed the small, shivering Pokémon to Meowth. The talking Pokémon took Pikachu with a surprising gentleness, cradling him against his chest and immediately starting to lick his fur dry with rapid, efficient strokes. A moment later, a spark caught in James's tinder. A tiny flame flickered to life, fragile and precious in the oppressive gloom. He carefully fed it small, dry twigs, his movements deft and focused. Soon, a small but determined fire was crackling, pushing back the cold and painting the cramped space in dancing shades of orange and black. The four of them huddled around it, a silent, unlikely tableau. Ash sat with his knees drawn to his chest, his eyes fixed on the flames, watching the light flicker over Pikachu's now dry fur as Meowth continued his work. Jessie sat on the other side of the fire, her arms wrapped around herself, staring into the darkness of the forest. James tended to the fire, adding slightly larger sticks, his expression thoughtful and distant. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. For Ash, it was a hollow, ringing void where the voices of his friends used to be. For Team Rocket, it seemed to be a silence of profound uncertainty. They had spent years chasing this boy, this Pokémon. Their entire lives had been structured around his movements. Now, here he was, delivered to them by a cruel twist of fate, and the script was gone. There was no boss to report to, no machine to unveil, no triumphant motto to declare. There was just a fire, a storm, and a broken teenager. So, Meowth said, finally breaking the tension, his voice low. He had finished drying Pikachu, who was now curled into a tight ball in his lap, asleep. "What's the deal, Jess? We goin' soft?" Jessie didn't turn from the darkness. "We're being smart," she said, her voice flat. "Did you feel that back at the party?" "Feel what?" "The buffet table calling my name." "No, you furball," she snapped, a flash of her old self returning. The power. When the twerp went supernova. The whole world went quiet for a second. That wasn't a Pokemon move. That was something else. Something big. James looked up from the fire. She's right. It was unsettling. Like the air got thick. "And you saw his friends," Jessie continued, her voice dropping again. "The Goody Two-Shoes Brigade. They looked at him like he was a monster. Whatever he did, it scared them enough to turn on him." She finally turned her head, her gaze falling on Ash, who was still staring into the fire, his expression unreadable. "The Pokemon League, all those champions and gym leaders, they're not going to study a power like that. They're going to lock it in a box and throw away the key. And the twerp along with it." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Right now, he's the most wanted person on the planet. Everyone is looking for him. Which means they're not looking for a trio of washed-up Team Rocket grunts hiding in the woods." Her lips twisted into a wry, bitter smile. "For the first time in our lives, we're invisible. He's the lightning rod. We're just the static." It was a cold, pragmatic, and entirely selfish logic. And yet, it was the first time in hours that anyone had spoken about his situation with clarity instead of fear. Ash lifted his head, his eyes meeting Jessie's across the fire. He didn't see a villain. He saw a survivor. Someone who understood what it meant to be on the outside, looking in. "Our new motto," James murmured, a hint of his usual flair creeping back into his voice. "To be strategically insignificant. To fly under the radar of our betters." Jessie added, a spark of dark humor in her eyes. "Meowth, that's not a bad idea," Meowth finished, looking down at the sleeping Pikachu. Ash said nothing. He simply watched them, this fractured, failed, and fiercely loyal trio. They weren't helping him out of the goodness of their hearts. They were helping him because it was advantageous. It was a partnership of convenience, a truce born from mutual desperation. And in his shattered world, that was a foundation he could understand far better than the fickle ground of friendship he had been standing on just this morning. He took a piece of jerky that James offered him without a word and ate it, the salty, tough meat a welcome anchor in the chaos. The sun rose on a world washed clean. The storm had passed, leaving behind a forest dripping with water and smelling of damp earth and pine. The air was crisp and cool. Ash had barely slept. He had dozed fitfully, his mind a battlefield of fractured memories and betrayals. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Brock's pitying gaze, Misty's fear, his mother's tears. He woke with a start before dawn, his heart pounding, a cold sweat on his brow. He had checked on Pikachu first. The little Pokemon was still asleep, his breathing even, his energy slowly returning. Seeing him safe was the only thing keeping Ash from falling apart completely. The truce of the night before held in the stark light of day. There was an unspoken agreement. No sudden moves. No talk of the past. Only the present. Only survival. And survive, they did. Ash watched, a silent observer, as Team Rocket dismantled the camp with an efficiency that was jarring. They were not the bumbling clowns he knew. Here, in the wild, they were different. James, with a small kit from his pack, tested the stream water before declaring it safe to drink and filling their canteens. Jessie, chewing on a piece of dried fruit, studied the sun's position and the moss on the trees, determining their direction with an unerring confidence. League patrols will use the main roads, she announced, pointing deeper into the thick woods. So we go where the roads aren't. We'll stick to the deep forest, head north. There are fewer cities that way. Meowth scrambled up a tree, his claws finding easy purchase on the bark. He acted as a scout, his sharp eyes scanning the canopy, his ears twitching at every sound. Coast is clear, he'd call down. Nothin' but a flock of grumpy Spearow. They moved for hours, a silent, four-person squad. Ash walked in the middle, Pikachu now awake and perched warily on his shoulder. He said nothing, his senses on high alert. He had spent years traveling through forests like this, but never as a fugitive. Every snapped twig, every rustle of leaves, sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. His perception of his companions was warping with every step. He had always seen them as a joke, a minor annoyance that punctuated his real adventures. Their schemes were absurd, their machines prone to exploding, their determination comical. But that was only one side of them. He now saw the other. He saw the grit learned from 1,000 blast-offs, landing in harsh, unforgiving wilderness. He saw the resourcefulness born from being constantly underfunded and on the run. He saw the fierce, unyielding loyalty they had not to a faceless organization, but to each other. They were a pack. And for now, he was running with them. Late in the afternoon, they passed through a strange, unsettling stretch of woods. It happened suddenly. One moment, the forest was alive with the chittering of bug types and the songs of birds. The next, there was only silence. A deep, profound, and unnatural silence. The air grew cold, a damp chill that sank into their clothes and raised the hairs on their arms. The vibrant greens and browns of the forest seemed to dull, as if a gray filter had been placed over the world. Pika. Pikachu whimpered, pressing closer to Ash's neck. His own Pokémon, even in their Pokeballs, felt agitated, a low hum of anxiety vibrating through their bond. What is this? James whispered, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. He rubbed his arms. It feels wrong. Meowth's fur was standing on end. I can't hear nothin', he hissed. Not a thing. It's like the whole forest is holding its breath. Jessie stopped, her hand resting on the Pokeball at her belt. She scanned the silent trees, her eyes narrowed. I don't like this. Let's move. Quickly. They pushed through the silent patch, which lasted for perhaps 100 yards. It was like walking through a dead world. Nothing moved. Not a leaf stirred, though they could feel a breeze on their faces. It was a place where life felt absent. Then, just as suddenly as they had entered it, they left. Sound rushed back in, the chirping of a Pidgey, the rustle of a Rattata in the undergrowth. The colors brightened, and the oppressive cold vanished, replaced by the normal warmth of the afternoon sun filtering through the leaves. They all stopped, breathing a collective sigh of relief. What in Arceus's name was that? James asked, looking back at the stretch of woods they had just passed. It looked perfectly normal now. A bad vibe, Jessie said, shaking her head as if to clear it. Just a creepy patch of woods. Forget it. Let's keep moving. They did, but Ash couldn't forget it. The feeling of that place, the emptiness, the silence, it resonated with a part of him. The part that had flared to life the day before. The part that had hollowed him out. He didn't understand the connection, but he felt it, a cold premonition that he had just touched the edge of something far older and more dangerous than the Pokémon League. They were making their way up a rocky ridge an hour later when Pikachu's ears shot up. He let out a low, urgent Pikachu, and pointed down into the valley below. Ash followed his gaze. Two figures were moving through the trees, accompanied by two large Pokémon. Even from this distance, he recognized them instantly. A fiery red Blaziken. A massive, woolly Mamoswine. May and Dawn. His blood ran cold. Patrol, Jessie hissed, ducking behind a boulder. Get down. They flattened themselves against the rock, peering over the edge. May and Dawn were moving with purpose, their heads scanning the area. They weren't just wandering. They were tracking. How did they find us? James whispered, his voice tight with panic. The League must have trackers out, Ash said, his own voice low and strained. Houndum, Manectric, they could have picked up our scent. This is bad, this is real bad, Meowth muttered, his claws digging into the dirt. The princess and the contest queen. They're no slouches. Ash watched them, his heart a cold, heavy knot in his chest. He saw the determined set of May's jaw, the anxious worry on Dawn's face. They weren't soldiers. They were his friends. And they were hunting him like an animal. The wound from yesterday, still raw and bleeding, tore open anew. We need to go, Jessie said, already plotting a new course. If we move back down the other side of the ridge, it's too late, Ash cut her off. His voice was dangerously quiet. They've seen our tracks. Look. Down below, Dawn's mamoswine had stopped, its tusks pointed toward the base of the ridge they were on. Dawn said something to May, who nodded and recalled her Blaziken. They were preparing to climb. They were trapped. Okay, new plan, Jessie said, her mind racing. We fight, we create a diversion, and we run. It's what we do best. She looked at Ash. Twerp, you and me, will hit them hard and fast. James, Meowth, you get the smokescreen ready. But Ash wasn't listening. He was staring down at the approaching figures, a storm gathering in his eyes. Diversion. Run. He had been running. He had run from his home, from his mother, from the life he had built. He was tired of running. No, he said. The word was cold iron. Jessie stared at him. No. Twerp, this isn't the time for a crisis of confidence. They have a Blaziken and a mamoswine. We are seriously outgunned. I'm not running from them, Ash said, pushing himself to his feet. He walked to the edge of the ridge, in full view of the valley below. Pikachu stood on his shoulder, a mirror of his trainer's defiant posture. Ash. Dawn's voice floated up, a mixture of relief and fear. Thank goodness. We were so worried. Stop right there, Ash. May called out, her voice firm. Don't make this any harder than it has to be. Get down, you idiot. Jessie hissed from behind the rock. What are you doing? Ash ignored her. He looked down at the two girls who had once been his traveling companions. The memories assaulted him, sharing contest tips with Dawn, watching May's performances with pride, laughing together over a campfire. It all felt like a story about someone else. What do you want? Ash called down, his voice echoing in the valley. We want to help you. Dawn pleaded, her hands outstretched. What happened yesterday, it wasn't your fault. You're just sick. The League has people who can help you get better. Sick. The word was a slap in the face. They saw him as diseased. Broken. We're taking you in, Ash, May said, her expression hardening. Whether you like it or not. It's for the good of everyone. The good of everyone. The same hollow justification. A cold, hard clarity settled over Ash. These were not his friends anymore. They were agents of the people who wanted to put him in a cage. And he would not let that happen. Infernape, let's go, he said, his voice dropping to a low command. He tossed the Pokeball, and the flame Pokemon appeared beside him in a flash of light, its fiery crown blazing. You can't be serious. May shouted, shocked. You're going to fight us? She didn't wait for an answer. Fine. Blaziken, let's go. Her own fire/fighting powerhouse appeared at the base of the ridge, staring up at its counterpart. Ash, please don't. Dawn cried, but her plea was lost as she sent out Mamoswine. The ground trembled as the massive Pokémon prepared for battle. "Twerp, your funeral," Jessie muttered, but she was already reaching for a Pokeball. "Carnivine, let's get ready." "Pikachu, Electroweb," on the ground in front of them. Ash commanded. His voice was devoid of its usual passion. It was tactical. Precise. Pikachu leaped into the air and spat a sticky, electrified net that splattered across the rocky slope, creating a hazardous obstacle. "Mamoswine, break through it with Ice Shard." Dawn ordered. The twin-tusk Pokémon fired a volley of glowing blue shards of ice. They shredded the web and peppered the ridge, forcing Ash and Infernape to backpedal. "Blaziken, high jump kick." May yelled. The fire-slash-fighting Pokémon leaped, its legs a blur as it soared up the cliff face with incredible agility, aiming a devastating knee strike at Infernape. "Infernape, dig." The command was spoken almost conversationally. Infernape vanished into the ground just as Blaziken's attack would have connected. Blaziken sailed past, landing awkwardly on the uneven slope. "Now," Ash said. Infernape burst from the ground directly beneath Mamoswine. The surprise attack sent the colossal Pokémon stumbling. Mach Punch. Infernape's fist glowed, and it delivered a rapid-fire series of blows to Mamoswine's legs, forcing it to its knees. "Get it off, Mamoswine. Use Blizzard." Dawn cried out in panic. A vortex of icy wind began to swirl around Mamoswine. "Pikachu, Thunderbolt on Blaziken." Ash snapped, already anticipating the next move. A powerful bolt of lightning shot down the slope, forcing May's Pokémon to leap away from Mamoswine to avoid being caught in the blast, breaking their formation. It was brutally efficient. Ash wasn't battling. He was dismantling them. He used his Pokémon not as partners in a dance, but as instruments in a calculated dissection of his opponent's strategy. He exploited every opening, every moment of hesitation. May and Dawn, used to his more straightforward and emotional battle style, were completely thrown off balance. "This isn't you, Ash." May shouted, her voice laced with frustration. "You don't fight like this." "You're the ones who wanted a fight," Ash shot back, his voice cutting like glass. He had them on the defensive, but they were skilled trainers. They began to rally. Dawn directed Mamoswine to use its bulk as a shield, while May's Blaziken used it as cover to launch powerful flamethrower attacks up the ridge. A torrent of fire forced Infernape and Pikachu back toward the edge. "We have him pinned." Dawn yelled. "Now, May." "Right. Blaziken, Blaze Kick." Mamoswine, Ancient Power. The two attacks launched simultaneously. Blaziken became a fiery missile, soaring up the cliff. At the same time, Mamoswine's body glowed, and it unleashed a volley of shimmering, silver orbs of energy. The combined assault was overwhelming, a pincer movement designed to crush him. There was no room to dodge. Pikachu was too tired for another large-scale attack, and Infernape was caught in the open. From behind the rock, Jessie saw the inevitable collision. She saw the look on Ash's face, not fear, but a grim, cornered resignation. She saw the two girls below, their faces flushed with the certainty of victory, convinced they were doing the right thing. And something inside her snapped. "Wobbuffet, front and center," she shrieked, leaping out from behind the boulder and throwing her Pokeball. The patient Pokémon appeared with its signature cry, "Wobbuffet." It landed directly in the path of the oncoming attacks. "What are you doing?" Ash yelled, stunned. "Shut up and let me work." "Jessie!" screamed back. The Blaze Kick slammed into Wobbuffet's gelatinous body. The orbs of ancient power pelted it from all sides. The Pokémon just stood there, its vacant expression unchanging, absorbing the full force of the devastating combination. "Jessie, what is that thing doing?" James yelped. Jessie's grin was manic, a flash of her old, theatrical self. "Just wait for it. Counter." Wobbuffet's body flashed with a brilliant red light. All the kinetic energy from Blaziken's powerful kick was absorbed, amplified, and redirected. A massive wave of pure physical force erupted from Wobbuffet, catching the airborne Blaziken mid-air. The Pokémon cried out in shock as it was blasted backward, sent tumbling down the cliff face to land in a heap at May's feet, knocked out cold. "And for you," Jessie cackled, pointing at Mamoswine. Mirror coat. Wobbuffet's body now glowed with a shimmering, rainbow-colored light. The special energy from the ancient power attack was unleashed in a blinding wave of energy that struck the already weakened Mamoswine. The massive Pokémon groaned and collapsed, its battle over. Silence. May and Dawn stared, utterly dumbfounded. Their perfectly coordinated, overwhelming attack had been negated and turned back on them in the blink of an eye. They stared up the ridge, not at Ash, but at the woman in the tattered white uniform standing beside him, her hands on her hips, a triumphant, defiant look on her face. "Now, Carnivine, Vine Whip!" Jessie yelled, not letting the moment go. Her other Pokémon appeared, latching onto a nearby tree and lashing out with its vines, creating a tangled barrier on the slope. "James, now," she screamed. James didn't need to be told twice. He threw down a smoke bomb, a classic, but this time, it worked perfectly. A thick, acrid cloud of black smoke instantly enveloped the top of the ridge, obscuring them completely. "Let's move." Jessie grabbed Ash's arm, pulling him away from the edge. And for future reference, the correct response is, "Thank you." They plunged back into the forest, Meowth leading the way, leaving behind two shocked and defeated friends and a cloud of smoke. They didn't stop running for what felt like miles. They finally collapsed in a hidden dell, miles away from the ridge, their lungs burning, their bodies trembling with adrenaline. For a long time, the only sound was their ragged breathing. Ash sat with his back against a tree, his head in his hands. He had done it. He had fought them. He had won. And it felt like he had lost everything all over again. He felt a presence beside him and looked up. Jessie had sat down, not too close, but not far either. She was checking on Wobbuffet, giving the stoic Pokémon a grateful pat. They sat in silence for a few minutes. The sounds of the forest slowly returned to normal. Ash took a deep breath. He looked at her, at the woman who had just saved him. The woman he had spent years fighting against. Her hair was a mess, her uniform was torn, and there was a smudge of dirt on her cheek. But she had stood with him. She had fought for him. "Thank you," he said. The words were quiet, barely more than a murmur, but in the quiet of the dell, they were as loud as a shout. Jessie turned her head. She looked surprised, as if she hadn't actually expected him to say it. She held his gaze for a second, a dozen emotions flitting across her face, surprise, pride, a flicker of something softer, more uncertain. She quickly masked it with a shrug, turning her attention back to Wobbuffet. "Don't mention it," she said, her voice gruff. "They were annoying me." But Ash saw the corner of her mouth twitch into a small, almost imperceptible smile. He looked away, a strange warmth spreading in his chest. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't happiness. It was something much smaller, much more fragile. It was the feeling of not being completely alone. Two outcasts, two pariahs, hiding in the woods, with the whole world against them. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, slightly crushed citrus berry he'd saved. Without a word, he held it out to her. Jessie looked at the berry, then at him. She hesitated for a moment, then took it. Their fingers brushed, a brief, fleeting contact. She took a bite of the berry, and they sat there in silence as the sun began to set, the embers of their campfire from the night before mirrored in the shared, unspoken understanding that had begun to glow between them. Chapter 3, The Whispering Tree. They traveled for 2 more days, a forced march through the untamed wilds of Kanto. The rhythm of their lives became brutally simple: walk, hide, eat, sleep. They spoke little, the new, fragile alliance still too strange for casual conversation. The silence was filled instead by action. Ash saw James's surprisingly gentle touch when tending to a Pokémon's minor injury. He saw Meowth's street smarts manifest as an uncanny ability to find safe, hidden paths. And he saw Jessie's sharp, strategic mind constantly at work, planning their routes, rationing their dwindling supplies, and pushing them onward with a relentless will. They were no longer just running. They were running from something. The encounter with May and Dawn had been a stark reminder of their reality. They were prey. Ash saw the faces of his former friends not in anger, but with a cold, hollow ache. They were tools of a system that now saw him as a disease. The thought was a constant, low-grade fever in his mind. During the second night, while the others slept, Ash sat by the dying fire, Pikachu dozing on his knee. He closed his eyes and tried to touch that wellspring of power inside him, the one that had erupted at the lab. It wasn't a conscious effort to use it, but to understand it. He reached for it, and for a terrifying moment, he felt it answer. A wave of energy, vast and oceanic, surged within him, making his teeth ache and the air around him hum. The embers of the fire flared violently, casting dancing, monstrous shadows on the trees. Pikachu jolted awake with a startled cry. From across the fire, Jessie stirred, sitting up. Twerp. What was that? Ash flinched as if struck, and the feeling vanished. The fire died back down. He was panting, a cold sweat on his brow. Nothing, he lied, his voice shaky. Just a bad dream. Jessie stared at him for a long moment, her eyes narrowed in the flickering firelight. She didn't believe him, but she didn't press the issue. She just watched him until he forced himself to lie down, his mind racing. He couldn't control it. It was a wild, untamed thing living inside him, and every time he touched it, he risked losing himself. The next morning, the mood was tense. Their food was almost gone, and their energy was flagging. "We can't keep this up," James said, collapsing against a tree trunk. He held up their last, pathetic-looking rice ball. "This is it. After this, we're down to foraging for berries, and my Berries of the Kanto Region guidebook is woefully out of date. We need a destination," Jessie said, pacing back and forth, a frown creasing her brow. "A place to lie low. Somewhere off the grid. Somewhere the League and all their little heroes won't think to look." "What, like our secret base?" Meowth snorted. "The boss sealed that up tight after we borrowed the budget for the last giant Meowthbot. They were stuck. Every city, every town, was a trap. Any known landmark would be watched." Ash, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it cut through their bickering. "I know a place." 3 pairs of eyes turned to him. "It's far from here," Ash continued, thinking aloud. "Remote. Hard to get to. It's not really connected to the rest of the world." The memories were hazy, dreamlike, from a time that felt like a different life. A battle to save a world of Pokémon, a heroic sacrifice, a miraculous revival. The Tree of Beginning. James's eyes went wide. The Tree of Beginning? Isn't that just a myth? A bedtime story? "It's real," Ash said, his voice firm with the certainty of experience. "I've been there." Meowth looked skeptical. "And how?" "Exactly, do you propose we find this mythical, off-the-grid Pokémon treehouse?" "It ain't on any map I've ever seen." "I don't need a map," Ash said. He looked toward the distant mountains, a strange, intuitive sense of direction settling over him. It was a pull, a faint echo of the aura he had felt there. "I can feel the way." Jessie studied him, her gaze intense. She saw the new, quiet confidence in his eyes. It wasn't the boisterous self-assurance she was used to. This was something deeper, calmer. She remembered the flare of power from the night before, the way the fire had leaped in response to his presence. She was starting to understand that the twerp was navigating by a different set of senses now. "All right," she said, making a decision. "Lead the way, compass boy. It's better than starving to death here." The journey to the Tree of Beginning was an odyssey. It took them out of the familiar forests of Kanto and into the harsh, unforgiving mountain ranges that bordered it and Johto. Ash led them with an almost unnerving certainty, guiding them through treacherous passes and down forgotten animal trails. He was following a feeling, a faint hum of life energy on the edge of his perception that grew stronger with each passing day. His new family followed, their initial skepticism slowly giving way to a grudging respect. They saw him navigate by the stars, predict weather changes by the feel of the air, and calm aggressive wild Pokémon with a quiet word and a steady gaze. This was not the naive twerp they knew. This was someone else. Someone competent. Decisive. The transformation was happening in them, too. Stripped of their Team Rocket personas, their true skills emerged. James proved to have an encyclopedic knowledge of botany, identifying edible plants and medicinal herbs that kept them fed and healthy. Meowth's ability to speak to Pokémon became their greatest asset. He negotiated passage with a grumpy Ursaring, got directions from a territorial flock of Pidgeot, and charmed a family of Sandshrew into helping them dig a shelter during a hailstorm. And Jessie. Jessie was the strategist. The leader. She saw the big picture, managing their morale, pushing them when they needed to be pushed, and knowing when to let them rest. She and Ash fell into an unspoken rhythm. He would point the way, and she would figure out how to get them there. One evening, as they huddled around a fire in the lee of a mountain cliff, Jessie was cleaning her knife on a piece of leather. Ash was staring into the flames, a familiar, troubled look on his face. "You're thinking about it again, aren't you?" she said, not looking at him. Ash flinched. "Thinking about what?" "The light show. The thing you do." She finally looked up, her expression serious. "I saw it the other night." "You're afraid of it?" Ash didn't deny it this time. He just nodded, his shoulders slumping. "It feels like a tidal wave inside me. If I let it out, I don't know if I'll be able to stop it. I don't know if I'll still be there when it's over." Jessie finished cleaning her knife and sheathed it with a soft click. "When I was a kid," she said, her voice unusually quiet, "I was dirt poor. Lived in an orphanage. We'd get snow in the winter, and all we had to eat was snow. I learned to love it. To pretend it was a feast. Snow burgers, snow sushi, snow stew." Ash looked at her, confused by the sudden tangent. "My point, twerp," she continued, "is that you learn to live with what you've got. You learn to make it work for you. This power, it's a part of you now. Hiding from it, being afraid of it, that's giving it control. You think a tidal wave is dangerous? Try putting it in a bottle. It'll just shatter the glass." She poked the fire with a stick, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. "You need to learn to surf." Her words were blunt, unsentimental, but they struck a chord deep within him. She wasn't telling him to suppress it or get rid of it. She was telling him to own it. It was the most practical, and perhaps the most profound, piece of advice he had ever received. They found the Tree of Beginning nestled in a hidden valley, shielded from the outside world by a ring of jagged, impassable mountains. It was just as Ash remembered it, a colossal, crystalline structure that was both mountain and plant, its trunk soaring into the clouds, its leaves glowing with a soft, internal light. The air here was different, thrumming with a palpable life force, aura. As they approached, the ground began to glow with soft blue patterns. Crystalline structures, like antibodies, rose from the earth, forming a defensive perimeter. "Whoa, what's this?" James yelped, stumbling back. "A security system." "It's the tree," Ash said, holding up a hand. "It's protecting itself." He closed his eyes, focusing on the hum of aura around him. He didn't try to control his own power. He just let it be. He projected a feeling of peace, of familiarity, of a friend returning. He thought of his previous visit, of Lucario, of Mew. Slowly, the glowing crystals receded back into the ground. The path to the tree was clear. "Show off," Jessie muttered, but there was a note of genuine awe in her voice. They entered the tree through a massive, cavernous opening at its base. The interior was a breathtaking world unto itself. A vast, glowing chamber filled with crystalline flora, waterfalls of pure energy, and countless Pokémon living in harmony. It was a sanctuary, a world hidden within the world. As they ventured deeper, a small, pink creature with a long, thin tail and large blue eyes materialized in the air before them. It tilted its head, its expression one of pure, childlike curiosity. "Mew," Ash breathed, a smile touching his lips for the first time in days. "You have returned," a voice echoed, not in their ears, but directly in their minds. It was playful, yet ancient. "And you are changed. Brighter." Mew zipped around Ash, its curiosity palpable. It then turned its attention to his companions, hovering in front of Jessie, who stared back, wide-eyed. "You are loud," Mew communicated, its mental voice laced with amusement. "Full of sharp edges and broken pieces. But your color is loyal." Jessie just blinked, speechless. Mew then zipped over to James and Meowth. "You are sad, but kind. And you," it paused, focusing on Meowth, "you are a puzzle. A Pokémon who speaks the human tongue. How wonderful." Meowth puffed out his chest. "See? I'm a one-of-a-kind marvel." The playful atmosphere shifted as Mew turned its attention back to Ash. "The world outside is noisy. Frightened. They hunt you. And the silence grows." Ash's blood ran cold. "The silence? A place where we passed on our way here," Meowth translated Ash's thought. "A patch of woods where everything just stopped." Mew's playful expression became serious. "It is the shadow of creation. The emptiness that was before. It is drawn to great lights. And you, child of Aura, have become a star." The psychic voice was grave. "The tree can shield you. And it can teach you. The power you hold is the power of beginning. The aura of creation. You do not control it because you fight it. You must learn to guide it. To become its partner, not its master." Over the next few weeks, the Tree of Beginning became their home, their school, and their sanctuary. Under the strange, silent tutelage of Mew and the life force of the tree itself, Ash began to train. It wasn't training in the way he knew it. There were no battles, no sparring partners. It was about control. About connection. Mew would lead him to a chamber filled with wilted, dying crystal flowers. His task was not to blast them with energy, but to gently touch them and pour a trickle of his aura into them, coaxing them back to vibrant life. His first attempts were disastrous. He would focus too hard, and a surge of power would shatter the delicate crystals into dust. He would be too hesitant, and nothing would happen. Frustration gnawed at him. Jessie would often watch him from a distance, leaning against a crystal pillar. One day, after he had accidentally vaporized an entire patch of flowers, he slammed his fist against the wall, a cry of rage and despair tearing from his throat. "I can't do it," he yelled to the empty chamber. "I can't." "Of course you can't," her voice echoed from the entrance. "You're trying to command it." Mew said, "Guide it. You don't yell at a river to make it flow, you dig a channel for it to follow." He turned on her, his eyes blazing. "What would you know about it?" "I know about control," she said, walking toward him. Her voice was calm. "I spent years trying to control a bratty Ekans, then a hot-headed Arbok. You can't just shout orders at power. You have to understand it. Respect it. What does it want to do? What did it want to do?" The question stopped him cold. He had only ever thought of it as something to be contained. It wants to create, he said slowly, the realization dawning on him. Mew called it the aura of creation. Then let it create, Jessie said simply. Stop trying to force it. Just, open the door and point it in the right direction. He looked at her, then back at the dust of the shattered flowers. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and tried again. This time, he didn't focus on the result. He focused on the feeling of the power inside him, that vast, oceanic energy. He didn't try to dam it or bottle it. He just, invited it. He held his hand over a single, wilted bloom that had survived his earlier outburst, and he pictured it healthy, vibrant, and alive. He offered the energy a path, a purpose. A single, brilliant thread of blue-white light, no thicker than a string, flowed from his palm. It coiled around the stem of the flower. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the flower began to glow. Its petals slowly unfurled, the wilted brown turning to a vibrant, luminous pink. In seconds, it was a perfect, crystalline blossom, pulsing with gentle light. Ash stared at it, his breath caught in his throat. He had done it. He had guided it. He looked up at Jessie, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph on his face. She gave him a small, genuine smile. See? Surfing. While Ash trained his soul, Jessie, James, and Meowth found their own purpose. They were not content to be idle guests. They became the tree's unofficial custodians. James, using his botanical knowledge, began cataloging the unique crystal flora, discovering plants with incredible restorative properties. Meowth became the ambassador, communicating with the tree's Pokémon inhabitants, organizing them, and learning the intricate layout of the tree's vast network of tunnels. Jessie became the fortress commander. She explored the tree's outer defenses, studied its weaknesses, and devised new defensive strategies. She trained her own Pokémon with a new, focused intensity. She and Ash began to spar, not with his aura, but with their Pokémon. Her style was unorthodox, full of tricks and misdirection learned from a lifetime of desperate battles. She was clever and unpredictable, forcing Ash to think strategically, to anticipate, to use his Pokémon's skills in ways he never had before. She pushed him, challenged him, and refused to let him rely on his new, overwhelming power as a crutch. In these moments, a new dynamic was forged. They were partners. Equals. The lines between twerp and villain, hero and outcast, blurred and then vanished completely. Meanwhile, in a sterile, white command center far from the sanctuary of the tree, Executor Sylvan stood before a massive holographic map of the world. Data streams flowed across it, showing patrol routes, energy readings, and witness reports. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed, with calm, intelligent eyes that held a chilling certainty. The subject, designated Ketchum, has vanished, a subordinate reported, her voice clipped and professional. He evaded two of our primary trackers near the Kantojado border. All scent trails have gone cold. Sylvan steepled his fingers, his gaze fixed on the map. Not cold. Deliberately erased. The storm was a piece of luck for him, but the encounter with Agents May and Dawn was not. Their report indicates he is not alone. He is traveling with known members of the criminal organization Team Rocket. Criminals collaborating with an unstable, Omega-level energy source, the subordinate noted grimly. This complicates matters. It simplifies them, Sylvan corrected, his voice smooth and measured. It provides us with a clear narrative. The boy has fallen. He has allied himself with criminals. This is no longer a rescue mission. It is a containment operation. He zoomed in on the map, on the vast, uncharted mountain ranges where Ash had last been seen. The energy flare at the Oak Laboratory was unlike anything we have on record. Greater than a Z-move, more sustained than a Dynamax transformation. It registered on every sensor on the continent. A power like that cannot be allowed to exist unchecked. He turned away from the map, his eyes sweeping over the assembled agents of his Aegis division. They were the best of the best, elite trainers handpicked from across the regions, their faces set with grim purpose. His friends believe he can be saved, Sylvan continued, his voice resonating with quiet authority. They believe the boy they knew is still in there. They are good people, and their hope is admirable. But hope is not a strategy. Our mandate is not to save Ash Ketchum. It is to protect the world from him. We will find him. We will neutralize the threat. By any means necessary. His gaze fell upon a new energy reading that had just flickered onto the screen. It was faint, almost imperceptible, a strange, null field anomaly deep within the northern mountain range. Investigate that, he commanded, his voice dropping. There is a silence in the data. I don't like it. One evening, after a long day of training, Ash found Jessie sitting alone on a crystalline ledge that overlooked the entire central chamber of the tree. The internal light of the cavern cast her in a soft, ethereal glow. He sat down beside her, a comfortable silence settling between them. You're getting better at it, she said, not looking at him. You were right, he admitted. It's not about fighting it. They watched as Mew chased a group of glowing butterfree through the air below, a silent, beautiful ballet of light. Ash's mind drifted back to the betrayal. The memory was still a raw wound, but the frantic, desperate pain had subsided, replaced by a deep, hollow ache. He had been so focused on survival, on training, that he hadn't allowed himself to truly process it. Why did you help me? He asked, the question coming out before he could stop it. Back in the forest. You could have just taken Pikachu. It's what you've always wanted. Jessie was silent for a long time, her gaze fixed on the scene below. I don't know, she said finally, her voice soft. Maybe I was tired of losing. Maybe, you looked like how I felt after the boss told us our last mission was a catastrophic failure and cut our pay for the third time that month. She let out a short, humorless laugh. Maybe I just know what it's like to have the whole world decide you're the bad guy. She turned to him, her eyes searching his. Does it still hurt? Thinking about them? Ash nodded, unable to speak. Good, she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. It should. It means the boy they threw away is still in there. He was caught off guard by her directness, by the simple, profound empathy in her words. He looked at her, at this woman who had been his cartoon nemesis for a decade, and saw her clearly for the first time. He saw the loneliness she hid behind her bravado, the disappointment she masked with drama, the fierce loyalty she reserved for the two people who had stuck by her through everything. He had a sudden, overwhelming urge to close the small distance between them. He thought he saw something in her eyes, a flicker of that same impulse. The air crackled with unspoken potential. But then, a tremor ran through the tree. A deep, resonant shudder that made the crystal formations around them vibrate with a low hum. The gentle glow of the cavern flickered, dimming for a heart-stopping second before returning. The Pokémon below stopped their play, their heads shooting up in alarm. Mew appeared before them in a flash of pink light, its expression one of pure, unadulterated dread. It is here, the psychic voice screamed in their minds, a raw cry of terror. The silence. It has found us. Ash and Jessie scrambled to their feet, looking toward the entrance of the tree. A creeping darkness was pouring in, not a shadow, but an absence of light. And with it came that same, soul-deepening cold, that same profound, unnatural quiet they had felt in the forest. But this time, it wasn't just a passive feeling. In the center of the encroaching void, a figure was taking shape. A being of solidified emptiness, a humanoid silhouette made of anti-light, its form constantly shifting, wavering like smoke, but holding a terrifying coherence. It had no face, no features, only a gaping void where a soul should be. It was the Harbinger. And it had come for the star. Chapter 4, The Harbinger's Shadow. The silence was a physical presence. It rolled into the great chamber of the tree, beginning like a tide of black water, swallowing sound as it came. The gentle hum of the crystal structures, the distant rush of the energy waterfalls, the collective chittering of 1,000 Pokémon, all of it vanished, snuffed out by an oppressive, suffocating quiet. With the silence came the cold. Not the crisp chill of a mountain peak, but a dead, draining cold that seeped into the very marrow of their bones. The vibrant, glowing flora of the tree began to dim, their internal light flickering like dying candles. A creeping gray frost, like a film of ash, spread across the luminous crystals, dulling their sheen. In the center of it all stood the Harbinger. It was a void in the shape of a man. It absorbed the light around it, making it a silhouette of pure, starless night against the fading glow of the cavern. Its edges wavered and smoked like dry ice, and its form was unstable, yet it moved with a chilling, deliberate grace. It took a step forward, and the ground beneath its feet didn't just frost over, it seemed to die. The crystalline grass became brittle and gray, crumbling to dust. The Pokémon of the tree, who had known nothing but peace and harmony, were paralyzed by a terror beyond their understanding. Some tried to flee, only to find their legs wouldn't obey them. Others tried to muster attacks, a vine whip from a Tangela, an ember from a Vulpix, but the abilities fizzled into nothingness before they could even form. The Harbinger's presence was an anti-energy field, a null zone where the very laws of their world were coming undone. Pokémon began to fall into a stupor, their eyes glazing over, their bodies going limp not as if they had fainted, but as if the spark of life within them had simply been extinguished. "What is that thing?" James cried, his voice a strangled whisper that was immediately swallowed by the silence. He, Jessie, and Meowth were huddled behind a large crystal formation, their faces pale with a terror that dwarfed anything Team Rocket had ever inspired. Ash stood on the ledge, frozen for a single, heart-stopping moment. He could feel it. The Harbinger wasn't just exuding silence, it was feeding. It was a psychic black hole, draining the life force, the very aura, from the tree itself. And its attention, its cold, unblinking focus, was fixed entirely on him. It felt him. It knew he was a beacon, a feast of creation energy in a world it sought to unmake. "Run!" Mew's frantic, terrified voice shrieked in his mind. The small, legendary Pokémon was glowing with a fierce pink energy, trying to form a psychic barrier around the fallen Pokémon, but the shield was wavering, cracking under the immense pressure of the Harbinger's aura of non-being. "Its touch is erasure. You cannot fight it." But Ash wasn't listening. He saw the life draining from the sanctuary that had given him refuge. He saw the Pokémon collapsing. He saw the fear on Jessie's face as she stared at the creature. He wasn't the boy who had stumbled into the forest anymore. He was the guardian this place had trained. A cold, determined fire ignited in his chest, pushing back against the encroaching dread. This thing had come for him. It had invaded his home. And it would not have it. "Pikachu, let's go," he yelled, his voice cutting through the silence with sheer force of will. He leaped from the ledge, sliding down a crystalline slope to land on the chamber floor, placing himself directly between the Harbinger and the heart of the tree. Pikachu was on his shoulder, a small, defiant ball of yellow fur, his cheeks sparking furiously. The Harbinger stopped its advance. It tilted its featureless head, a gesture of almost curious appraisal. "You want me?" Ash shouted, his voice ringing in the dead air. "Come and get me." Pikachu, Thunderbolt. Pikachu unleashed a massive bolt of lightning, a brilliant, roaring torrent of pure electric power that had felled legendary Pokémon. It shot across the chamber and struck the Harbinger dead center. And passed right through it. The thunderbolt continued on its path, striking the far wall of the chamber in a shower of sparks, leaving the Harbinger completely untouched. The creature didn't even flinch. It was like throwing a rock through smoke. Ash stared, his confidence faltering for a second. "What?" The Harbinger raised an arm, a slow, deliberate motion. A tendril of its shadowy form detached and lashed out like a whip of pure darkness. It wasn't fast, but it was relentless. "Pikachu, dodge it." Pikachu zipped to the side, but the tendril corrected its course, following him unerringly. It wasn't a physical attack. It was a targeted erasure of space. Wherever it passed, the air grew colder, the light dimmer. Infernape, help him out. Mach punch. Ash threw the pokeball, but the red light of the beam fizzled out a few feet from his hand. The pokeball clattered uselessly to the floor. The null field was too strong. He couldn't even call on his other Pokémon. It was just him and Pikachu. The Shadow Whip lunged. Pikachu, fast as he was, couldn't evade it forever. The tip of the whip brushed against his tail. Pikachu! Pikachu screamed, a sound of pure agony. The vibrant yellow of his tail instantly turned a dull, lifeless gray. He collapsed to the ground, twitching, the energy draining from his body at a visible rate. Pikachu! Ash roared, a wave of pure, protective fury washing over him. He ran to his partner's side, scooping him up. Pikachu was cold, his body limp, his light fading. The Harbinger continued its slow, inexorable advance. Ash looked at his dying friend, then at the unstoppable creature. Fear, cold and sharp, tried to grip him, but the fury was stronger. Jessie's words echoed in his mind. Stop trying to force it. Just, open the door and point it in the right direction. He couldn't destroy it. He had seen that. Attacks passed through it. It was a being of entropy, of unmaking. You couldn't kill in absence. But Mew had called his power the aura of creation. The opposite. Not destruction. Life. He closed his eyes. He didn't try to build a dam against the fear. He didn't try to summon a weapon. He reached inside himself for that oceanic power, that vast wellspring of energy. He opened the door. And he gave it a purpose. Not to fight. Not to destroy. To create. To heal. He held Pikachu in one arm and thrust his other hand forward, palm open. A brilliant, blue-white light erupted from his palm. It wasn't an attack beam. It was a wave of pure life energy, a sunbeam in the deepest night. It washed over the chamber, and where it passed, the creeping gray frost vaporized. The dimming flora flared back to vibrant life. The fallen Pokémon stirred, the spark of their life force being reignited. His aura of creation was a direct counter to the Harbinger's aura of decay. The wave of life-giving energy slammed into the Harbinger. For the first time, the creature reacted. It recoiled, its form wavering violently as the creative energy clashed with its entropic nature. It let out a soundless scream that echoed in their minds, a feeling of pure, cold hatred. It worked. Ash breathed, hope surging through him. He poured more energy into the wave, pushing the creature back. From their hiding place, Jessie, James, and Meowth stared in disbelief. He's a human nightlight, James stammered. Jessie wasn't watching the light show. She was watching Ash. His body was trembling, his face pale and beaded with sweat, his knuckles white. The power was flowing from him. He was the source. And the strain was immense. The Harbinger, though pushed back, was not defeated. It solidified its form, resisting the wave of life energy. It was a battle of fundamental forces, creation versus entropy. Ash was a single, mortal conduit channeling the power of existence against a being of pure void. It was like trying to hold back the ocean with his bare hands. He could feel his own life force draining away, feeding the torrent of aura. His vision began to blur at the edges. A profound, bone-deep exhaustion was setting in. He was burning himself out, a candle against a hurricane. Twerp, you can't keep that up. Jessie screamed, her voice cutting through his concentration. You're going to burn yourself to a crisp. I have to, he yelled back, his voice strained. It's the only thing that works. He pushed harder, unleashing another, more powerful pulse of aura. The light intensified, becoming almost blinding. The Harbinger was driven back several more feet, its form flickering and destabilizing. He was winning. But the cost was staggering. A sharp, searing pain shot through his chest. His breath hitched. The flow of aura from his hand faltered for a second. His knees buckled, and he dropped to one knee, still cradling Pikachu, his arm trembling as he tried to maintain the energy wave. The Harbinger instantly pressed its advantage. The tide of silence and cold surged forward again, crashing against Ash's weakening defense. No. He gasped, forcing himself to pour more of his dwindling energy into the fight. He felt like he was being torn apart from the inside. He was pouring his own life into the attack, and he was running out. Mew, seeing Ash falter, let out a defiant cry. It abandoned its attempts to shield the other Pokémon and flew to Ash's side, adding its own psychic power to his. A pink aura enveloped Ash's blue-white one, reinforcing it, strengthening it. The combined power was immense, a nova of life energy that slammed into the Harbinger with the force of a physical blow. The creature's shadowy form was blasted apart. It dissolved into wisps of black smoke, screaming its silent rage into their minds before vanishing completely. The silence broke. Sound rushed back in, the hum of the tree, the cries of the Pokémon, the rush of the wind. The oppressive cold vanished, replaced by the natural, cool air of the cavern. The light returned to its full, vibrant glory. It was over. Ash's arm dropped to his side, the light from his palm extinguishing. The world swam in his vision, black spots dancing before his eyes. The pain in his chest was a dull, heavy ache. He had won. He had defeated the Harbinger. Then, the cost came due. The last of his strength vanished. The world tilted on its axis and then went black. He collapsed, his body hitting the crystalline floor with a heavy thud. Pikachu, now stirring, slipped from his grasp. Ash! Jessie's scream echoed through the chamber. She, James, and Meowth scrambled out from their hiding place, rushing to his side. Mew was already there, hovering over Ash's still form, its own light flickering weakly. The effort of the battle had drained it as well. Jessie fell to her knees beside him. Twerp! Ash, get up! She grabbed his shoulder, shaking him. There was no response. His face was a deathly pale, his lips tinged with blue. He wasn't breathing. He's not breathing. James said, his voice cracking with panic. Do something. I don't know what to do. Jessie shrieked, her usual composure shattered. She looked at Mew. Can't you help him? Use your psychic powers, or something. I am too weak, Mew projected, its voice faint and strained. The silence, it drained me. And he gave everything. His own life force. It is almost gone. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Jessie. She looked at Ash's still, pale face. The boy who had been her rival, her annoyance, her unlikely companion. The boy she had just started to see as something more. And he was dying. Right in front of her. No, she whispered, the word of fierce, guttural denial. No, you don't get to do this, you idiot. You don't get to save the world and then just die. All her years of training, not in Pokémon battles, but in the harsh, practical school of Team Rocket survival, kicked in. The organization, for all its faults, gave its grunts basic emergency medical training. You couldn't have your agents passing out every time a mission went sideways. She placed 2 fingers on his neck. Nothing. No pulse. James, tilt his head back, open his airway, she commanded, her voice suddenly sharp, authoritative. James, startled by her tone, scrambled to obey. Jessie placed her hands on Ash's chest, one over the other, just as she had been taught. Meowth, count for me. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. She began chest compressions, pushing down hard and fast, her whole body thrown into the effort. The rhythmic pressure was a desperate attempt to force his heart to remember its job, to keep the blood moving through his veins. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Meowth counted, his voice trembling. She kept going, her arms starting to ache, sweat beading on her forehead. The faces of Brock, the ultimate caregiver, and a dozen different Nurse Joys flashed through her mind. They would have known what to do. They would have had machines and medicine and perfectly trained Chansey. All she had was desperation and a half-remembered first aid course. "It's not working," James cried, his face slick with tears. "Shut up and keep his head tilted." Jessie snarled, not missing a beat. She leaned down, pinching Ash's nose, and breathed into his mouth, forcing air into his still lungs. Once. Twice. Then back to the compressions. "Come on, you stupid twerp," she muttered between breaths, her voice a raw, pleading growl. "Fight. You never give up. Don't you dare start now. Don't you leave me here." She wasn't just fighting for his life. She was fighting against the world that had done this to him. The friends who had abandoned him, the power that was killing him, the silent monster that had attacked him. Her compressions were a furious rebellion against all of it. Her arms were burning, her shoulders screaming in protest, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Then, as the harbinger dissolved, a final, parting gift of malice was delivered. A psychic backlash from its death rippled through the chamber. It wasn't an attack, but a vision. A shared, horrifying glimpse into the nature of their enemy. For a single, endless second, Ash's mind, even in its unconscious state, was plunged into the void. He saw it. The murk. Not as a creature, but as a place. An infinite, silent, starless expanse of absolute nothing. There was no up or down, no beginning or end. Only a cold, peaceful, and utterly terrifying emptiness. It wasn't evil. It was worse. It was apathy. It was the serene, logical conclusion that existence was an aberration, a chaotic flaw in the perfect peace of non-being. And it wanted to correct that flaw. It wanted to go home. And take everything with it. The vision seared itself into his mind, the memory of that perfect, awful peace, a new kind of terror. Back in the tree, Jessie felt a flicker of the vision, a cold dread that made her falter. She shook her head, forcing it away, focusing back on her task. On him. "Come on, Ash," she screamed, her voice breaking. She delivered another breath, then another round of compressions. Under her hands, she felt it. A flutter. A weak, fretty beat. Then another. Ash's body convulsed. He arched his back, and a ragged, gasping breath tore from his lungs. His eyes shot open, but they were unfocused, staring at nothing. The color began to seep back into his face, a slow tide of life returning. His heart was beating. He was breathing. Jessie collapsed beside him, her strength completely gone, panting with exhaustion and overwhelming relief. Tears she didn't know she was holding back streamed down her face, mingling with the sweat and grime. She had done it. She had pulled him back from the edge. Ash's vision slowly came into focus. The world was a blur of color and light. The first thing he saw was a flash of magenta hair. Then a face, streaked with tears and dirt, her eyes wide with a fierce, raw emotion he had never seen in them before. Jessie. She was leaning over him, her hand resting on his chest, right over his heart. He could feel the warmth of her touch through his shirt, an anchor in the dizzying sea of pain and exhaustion. He tried to speak, but only a hoarse croak came out. "Don't talk, you idiot," she whispered, her voice thick. "Just breathe." He lay there, on the floor of the Tree of Beginning, his life saved not by a legendary Pokemon or a mystical power, but by the sheer, stubborn will of the woman who was supposed to be his enemy. The dynamic between them had been irrevocably altered. He had been the protector. Now, she was. They were no longer just allies of convenience. They were tied together, bound by the shared trauma of the battle and the fierce, desperate act that had kept him alive. He now knew the name of his true enemy. It wasn't the League. It wasn't his former friends. It was the Merc. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that it would be back. But as he looked up at Jessie's exhausted but resolute face, he also knew he wouldn't be facing it alone. Chapter 5, A Kingdom of Outcasts. The week following the Harbinger's attack was one of quiet recovery. The Tree of Beginning, though wounded, slowly healed itself, its inner light growing stronger each day. Ash recovered faster than anyone thought possible. His awakened aura, it seemed, was as potent at mending as it was at creating. But the experience had left its mark. The physical exhaustion faded, but a new, heavier weariness settled deep in his bones. The memory of the silent, infinite void of the Merc was a cold stone in his gut, a constant reminder of the true stakes. He was different now. The last vestiges of the wide-eyed boy from Pallet Town had been scoured away by the battle. He was quieter, more watchful. His gaze held a startling intensity, the look of a man who had stared into oblivion and hadn't flinched. The change was most apparent in how he moved, how he spoke, with a new, unnerving economy. Every action had a purpose. The change in their group dynamic was just as profound. The old lines were gone, erased by the shared trauma and Jessie's desperate act to save his life. James and Meowth no longer looked at Ash as the twerp. They looked at him with a mixture of awe and a strange, familial concern, like an unpredictable younger brother who might accidentally level a mountain. And Jessie, something had fundamentally shifted between them. The air was thick with unspoken things. They would find themselves watching each other across the cavern. A shared glance would hold a conversation's worth of meaning. The comfortable silence they had found before was now charged with a new tension, a nervous energy that was both exciting and terrifying. He owed her his life, and that debt was a bond stronger than any friendship he had ever known. She had fought for him, not for a prize or a promotion, but for him. The realization was a constant, warm presence in his chest. One evening, Ash stood with Jessie on the same ledge where they had faced the Harbinger. They were watching Mew teach a group of young Pokémon how to weave small orbs of light. "It will come back," Ash said, his voice low. It wasn't a question. "The Merc. It knows where I am. This place isn't safe anymore. Not for me, and not for anyone here." Jessie crossed her arms, her gaze fixed on the peaceful scene below. "So, we run again? Find another magic tree to hide in?" "No," Ash said, turning to face her. "I'm done hiding. It's not just hunting me. That thing in the forest, the silent patch, it's happening in other places, isn't it?" He directed the question to Mew, who had floated up to join them. "Yes," the psychic Pokémon communicated, its tone grim. "Small pockets of silence are appearing across the world. They are weak, temporary. For now. They are wounds in the fabric of existence. The Harbinger was a scalpel. The next attack will be a sword. We can't just wait for it to happen," Ash said, his jaw tightening. "We need to know more. We need to know where it's weakest, how to fight it, how to stop it. We need information. Resources. Allies. And where do you propose we find those?" Jessie challenged. "We're public enemy number one. The League wants your head on a pike, and our faces are on wanted posters in every Poke Mart from here to Cinnabar Island." "Not everyone answers to the Pokémon League," Ash countered, a strategic light glinting in his eyes. He was thinking of a place built on the very principles of strength and independence. "There's an island, off the coast of Kanto. Run by a man named Scott. He calls it the Battle Frontier." James, who had walked up with Meowth, overheard him. "The Battle Frontier? I've heard of that. A collection of the most powerful trainers outside the Elite Four. They call them the Frontier Brains. They're legends." "Exactly," Ash said. "They're powerful, they're independent, and they value strength above all else. If I can prove to them what's coming, they might listen. They might help. Might is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence, twerp, Jessie pointed out. What's to stop them from just handing you over to the League for a hefty reward? Because their entire philosophy is built on challenging the status quo, Ash argued. And because I'm going to give them a demonstration of a power that makes the Pokemon League look like a small-town gym. His confidence was absolute, magnetic. It wasn't arrogance. It was the calm certainty of a man who knew exactly how powerful he was. Jessie found herself caught in its pull, a reluctant smile tugging at her lips. This was a side of the twerp she had never seen, and she had to admit, she liked it. "All right, Compass Boy," she said. "You've got a destination. Now, how do we get there without getting arrested?" That was the problem. The battle frontier was on an island. They would need a boat, and every port would be watched. Meowth snapped his fingers, or the paw equivalent. "I got it. Giovanni has stashes all over Kanto. Hidden caches, emergency transport, escape routes. There's an old sub-dock hidden in a cove just south of Vermilion City. It's ancient, probably decommissioned, but if the sub is still there. It's our best shot," Jessie finished, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of a proper heist. A classic Team Rocket infiltration. Getting to the hidden dock was a mission in itself. They traveled by night, using Meowth's intel and Ash's aura-enhanced senses to avoid patrols. Ash's power was no longer a volatile, uncontrollable force. He was learning to use it subtly. A gentle push of his aura could make a guard on patrol suddenly feel an overwhelming urge to check a different street. A soft whisper of calming energy could soothe a suspicious guard Pokemon before it raised an alarm. He was a ghost, and his companions were his shadows. They reached the coastline near Vermilion City and found the hidden entrance to the sub-dock exactly where Meowth said it would be, a rusted, vine-covered door set into a cliff face, looking like nothing more than an abandoned maintenance hatch. The inside was a relic of a bygone era of Team Rocket's ambitions. A dusty, cavernous concrete bunker, smelling of salt and decay. And there, sitting in a dry dock, was their prize, a small, sleek, black submarine, shaped like a Magikarp. It was old and covered in dust, but it looked intact. "The Carpedo," James said with a dramatic flourish. "An old classic. State-of-the-art in its day. Mostly used for sneaking under cruise ships to replace the fancy hors d'oeuvres with our slightly less fancy forgeries." While James, a surprising grease monkey, worked on getting the sub's old engines to turn over, Jessie and Meowth set about disabling the silent alarms and outdated security systems. Ash acted as lookout, his senses spread thin, a living early warning system. He felt the approaching presence a full minute before they appeared. "Company," he said, his voice low and sharp. Jessie froze, her hand hovering over a circuit panel. "League?" "Worse," Ash growled. He recognized the cold, arrogant energy signature. He had hoped he wouldn't have to see him again. The doors to the bunker slid open, not with a rusty groan, but with a smooth, hydraulic hiss. A figure stood silhouetted against the moonlight outside. He was tall, with spiky purple hair and an expression of permanent, cynical disdain. Behind him, a massive Electivire stood, its twin tails sparking with raw power. Paul. Ash's Sinnoh rival. The trainer who embodied everything Ash had once fought against, power at any cost, Pokemon treated as tools, victory as the only measure of worth. "Well, well," Paul said, his voice dripping with condescension as he stepped into the bunker. "Catch 'em. I heard you'd gone off the deep end. I didn't realize that meant you were literally going underwater with these clowns." Jessie and James immediately bristled, reaching for their pokeballs. "Who are you calling clowns, you purple-haired punk?" Jessie snapped. Ash held up a hand, stopping them. He stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "What are you doing here, Paul?" Following the breadcrumbs, Paul said, his eyes scanning the scene, the sub, the Team Rocket members, Ash standing with them as an equal. A slow, calculating smirk spread across his face. When I heard the Alola champion had gone rogue after some mysterious incident, and that the entire league was in an uproar, I got curious. It didn't sound like you. You're too much of a goody two-shoes. His gaze sharpened, locking onto Ash. But then I started hearing the whispers. Not from the league news, but from other places. Rumors of a power that shattered the ground. Of a trainer who could fight without Pokémon. That sounded interesting. So I started looking for you. Imagine my surprise when your trail crossed with a known Team Rocket emergency route. Pathetic, even for you. I'm not in the mood for a lecture, Paul, Ash said, his voice cold. Good. I'm not here to give one, Paul shot back. He gestured at the sub. I'm here for a ride. Jessie scoffed. You've got to be kidding. Why in the world would we take you with us? Because you need me, Paul said simply. You think stealing a sub is the hard part? The battle frontier is on high alert. The League has a presence there. They'll have ships, sensors, aerial patrols. You'll be spotted before you get within 10 miles of the island. But a lone trainer flying in on his honchkrow, a trainer with a reputation for being an independent contractor who occasionally does work for the League? They won't look twice at me. I can be your eyes and ears on the island. Your inside man. It was a brutally pragmatic, entirely self-serving offer. And it was brilliant. And what's in it for you? Ash asked, his eyes narrowed. I want to see it, Paul said, his voice dropping, a flicker of genuine, hungry curiosity in his eyes. This power you have. The League sees it as a threat to be contained. I see it as the next stage of evolution for trainers. The ultimate expression of strength. I want to understand it. I want to see what it can do. He smirked. And watching you make the Pokémon League, the organization that always looked down on my methods, squirm like a Magikarp out of water. That's just a bonus. Ash looked at Jessie. He didn't need to say a word. She saw the strategic value instantly. Paul was an arrogant jerk, but he was also a powerful, ruthless, and intelligent trainer. His cynicism was a weapon, and right now, they needed every weapon they could get. Fine, Jessie said through gritted teeth. You can come. But you're sleeping in the torpedo tube. The journey to the battle frontier was tense. Paul kept to himself, a silent, judgmental presence in the cramped submarine. But his information was invaluable. Flying ahead on his honchkrow, he acted as their spotter, feeding them information on patrol routes and sensor blind spots via a secure comm link. With his guidance, they slipped through the League's naval blockade like a ghost. They docked in a hidden cove on the far side of the island, a place Paul had scouted earlier. The island was beautiful, a tropical paradise, but the air was thick with tension. The place is crawling with them, Paul reported as they disembarked. Not just regular League grunts. I saw some elite squads. Black uniforms, stylized Aegis shield insignia. They look serious. The Aegis Division, Ash murmured. Sylvan's personal army. Scott, the guy who runs this place, is being squeezed, Paul continued. The League is requesting his cooperation, but it's a request with teeth. The frontier brains are split. Some, like Brandon, the Pyramid King, are old-school explorers. They're intrigued by rumors of your power. Others, like Tucker, are showmen. They see you as bad for business, a threat to their comfortable position. So we're walking into a political minefield, Jessie summarized grimly. Worse, Paul said. They have a mobile command center set up at the battle tower. State-of-the-art communications and surveillance. If you're going to make a move, you need to blind them first. You need to get into that command center and access their files. Find out what they know, what their plans are, and maybe leave a little virus behind to scramble their systems. It was a classic heist. A high-risk, high-reward operation. How do we get in? James asked nervously. A place like that will be guarded by their top trainers. Most of them, yes, Paul said, a cunning gleam in his eyes. But there's going to be a public exhibition match at the Battle Dome in an hour. A show of unity between the League and the Frontier. Most of the top brass and their security will be there. It's the perfect cover. The plan came together quickly, a symphony of their disparate skills. Paul would create a distraction at the exhibition match, issuing a public challenge that would draw attention. James and Meowth would use their infiltration skills to disable the perimeter sensors and create a backdoor entrance into the command center. That left Ash and Jessie. You and me, Ash said, looking at her. We go in. We get the data. Just like old times, Jessie said with a wry grin. Except this time, we're not trying to steal a Pikachu. The Battle Dome was a spectacle of light and sound. The flamboyant frontier brain, Tucker, was putting on a show, his Arcanine and Swampert dancing in a perfectly choreographed routine. In the VIP box, Ash could see Scott, looking deeply uncomfortable, sitting next to a man in an impeccable white suit. The man's calm, composed demeanor radiated an aura of absolute authority. Even from a distance, Ash knew who he was. Executor Sylvan. While the show was in full swing, Jessie and Ash moved like shadows toward the battle tower. James's work was flawless, a side maintenance door slid open silently at their approach. Inside, the command center was a hive of activity, but thinner than it should have been, just as Paul predicted. They navigated the corridors, Ash's aura subtly influencing the guards they passed, making them feel a sudden need to check a different hallway, a sudden bout of inexplicable drowsiness. They reached the central server room, a chamber humming with the power of a dozen mainframes. Okay, tech boy, do your thing, Jessie whispered, taking up a guard position by the door, her hand on Sevapor's pokeball. Ash placed his hand on the main terminal. He didn't need to hack it in the traditional sense. He closed his eyes and let his aura flow into the machine, not as a destructive force, but as a current of inquiry. He interfaced with the data streams, sensing the flow of information like currents in a river. He found what he was looking for, encrypted files on him, on the Merc, on the Aegis Division's operational plans. He began to copy them to a small, shielded data chip Clement had given him long ago. Suddenly, a high-pitched alarm blared. Red lights began to flash throughout the complex. We've been made. Jessie hissed. On the terminal screen, a face appeared. It was Executor Sylvan, his expression as calm and unruffled as if he were commenting on the weather. He was still in the VIP box at the dome, but his eyes were locked on the security camera feed from the server room. On them. Mr. Ketchum, Sylvan's voice came through the speakers, smooth as polished steel. I must confess, I'm impressed. I didn't think you had this kind of subtlety in you. Or perhaps I should be addressing your accomplices. You don't know anything about me, Ash said, his eyes narrowed, continuing the data transfer. It was almost complete. Oh, I think I do, Sylvan replied, a hint of something almost like sympathy in his tone. I've studied your file. A boy who throws himself in front of danger to protect others. A boy who believes in the bonds between humans and Pokémon above all else. A noble, if naive, worldview. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing. Let me tell you a story, Ash. When I was a boy, my town was destroyed. Not by a volcano or an earthquake. It was destroyed by a Lugia. Not the guardian of the sea from the legends. Just a Lugia, driven into a blind, territorial rage. It wasn't evil. It was just, powerful. Too powerful. Its rage was a force of nature, like a hurricane or a tidal wave. And my town was in its path. His voice was still calm, but it held the weight of a deep, ancient trauma. I learned a valuable lesson that day. Unchecked power, even without malicious intent, is the single greatest threat to our world. A king's power is a threat to all who are not his subjects. The world doesn't need another king, Mr. Ketchum. It needs balance. Order. And I will provide it. The data transfer completed. Ash pulled the chip from the terminal. My turn to tell a story, Ash shot back. There's a storm coming, Sylvan. A real one. One that your order and balance can't stop. And you're so busy looking at me, you're not even seeing the clouds gather. Sylvan's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something, curiosity, annoyance, appeared in his eyes. A compelling narrative. But I'm afraid your story ends here. My best agents are 2 minutes from your location. We'll be gone in 1, Jessie said, throwing a pokeball. Sevapor, poison gas. A thick, purple cloud filled the server room, obscuring the camera. Let's go. Ash yelled. They ran. The alarms blaring around them, the sound of approaching footsteps echoing down the halls. They burst out of the maintenance door and ran for the cliffs, for the hidden cove. They could hear the shouts of the Aegis agents behind them, closing in. They reached the edge of the cliff overlooking their hidden sub. It was a long way down. Now what, genius? Jessie yelled over the wind. Ash didn't answer. He just grabbed her hand. Trust me. Before she could protest, he pulled her with him and jumped. For a terrifying second, they were in freefall. Jessie screamed, a mixture of terror and fury. Below them, James, Meowth, and Paul looked up in horror. Then, Ash's power flared. Not as an attack, but as a cushion. A swirling vortex of blue aura energy enveloped them, slowing their descent, turning the plummet into a gentle, controlled float. They landed on the deck of the sub as softly as falling leaves. You, Jessie panted, her heart hammering against her ribs, her hand still clutching his, are an absolute maniac. Ash just grinned, a flash of his old, reckless self. Get us out of here, James. The engines of the Carpedo roared to life, and the sub slid into the water, submerging just as a half-dozen Aegis agents appeared on the clifftop above, staring in disbelief. As the sub pulled away into the deep ocean, Ash and Jessie stood on the small deck of the conning tower, the sea spray on their faces. They were still holding hands. The adrenaline of the heist, the thrill of the escape, the charged energy between them, it all culminated in that moment. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and pink. Ash looked at her, at the wind whipping through her magenta hair, at the fierce, alive look in her eyes. He thought of her saving his life, of her standing with him against his friends, of her running into danger with him without a moment's hesitation. He was scared. Not of Sylvan, not of the Merc. He was scared of the feeling blooming in his chest, a feeling more powerful and terrifying than any aura he could command. But he remembered her words. Stop being afraid of it. Jessie, he said, his voice quiet but clear over the roar of the ocean. She looked at him, her own expression softening, her bravado falling away to reveal the vulnerability beneath. What you did, back in the tree. He started, his voice thick with emotion. You saved me. No one's ever fought for me like that. Well, she said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. Someone had to. You have a bad habit of trying to get yourself killed. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. Besides, it would be a shame to let the world's most wanted twerp die before I could see what other trouble he was going to cause. The space between them vanished. He didn't know who moved first. He just knew that one moment they were standing apart, and the next, her arms were around his neck, and his were around her waist, and he was kissing her. It wasn't a fairy tale kiss. It was messy, and desperate, and salty from the sea spray. It was a collision of two lonely, broken people who had found an anchor in each other in the middle of a raging storm. It was the sealing of a promise made not with words, but with action. A promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. When they finally broke apart, breathless, they just rested their foreheads against each other, the setting sun casting them in a golden glow. "So," she whispered, a playful spark returning to her eyes. "What's our next move, boss?" Ash looked out at the endless horizon. They had the data. They had a new, dangerous ally. And they had each other. For the first time since his world had shattered, he felt something that wasn't just survival. He felt hope. "Now," he said, a slow, determined smile spreading across his face. "We start fighting back." Chapter 6, The God in the Mirror. The Carpedo sliced through the deep, silent black of the ocean, a single, lonely capsule of life in an alien world. The adrenaline from the heist had faded, leaving behind a new, charged atmosphere in the cramped confines of the sub. Paul had retreated to a corner, pointedly ignoring everyone, his electivire standing guard like a hulking, yellow gargoyle. James and Meowth were busy trying to make sense of the sub's nutrient paste dispenser, arguing over whether Flavor 7 was supposed to taste like chicken or despair. But for Ash and Jessie, the world had shrunk to the small space they shared in the sub's cockpit. The kiss had changed everything. The unspoken tension had broken, replaced by a quiet, comfortable intimacy. A shared look, a light touch of his hand on her arm as he passed, the way she leaned against his shoulder as they watched the sonar screen, these small gestures were a new language they were learning together. It was strange, and wonderful, and felt more real than anything Ash had ever known. They were a unit, their partnership solidified not just by circumstance, but by choice. He felt the shift in his own aura when she was near, a calming influence on the tempestuous power within him. It was as if her presence provided the channel his power had been looking for, the riverbed Jessie had spoken of. But there was no time to dwell on it. The data chip he'd stolen from the battle frontier burned like a hot coal in his pocket. It held the answers they needed, and the dangers they had yet to face. "We need help cracking this," Ash said, pulling out the small, metallic sliver. "The encryption is military grade. It would take me weeks to get through it with my aura alone, and that's assuming I don't just fry the whole thing. So we need a computer nerd," Jessie summarized. "Preferably one who isn't on the League's payroll." Ash's mind immediately went to one person. The boy whose inventions, while often explosive, were born from a mind of pure, unadulterated genius. "Clement," he said. James, overhearing, nearly dropped a tube of nutrient paste. "Clement? The Lumio City gym leader? The one who was with you at the party? Isn't he on their side?" "He was," Ash said, his expression troubled. "But he's a scientist first. He believes in data and proof. And his sister. Bonnie, she always believed in me. There's another person, too. Serena." He saw a flicker of something in Jessie's eyes at the mention of Serena's name, a brief, almost imperceptible shadow. He remembered Serena from the party, her worried expression, the way she had looked at him with a mixture of confusion and concern, not the outright fear the others had shown. Serena wouldn't have agreed with what they did, Ash said, more to himself than to the others. She would have looked for another way. If I can get a message to her, she might be able to convince Clement to at least look at the data. Paul snorted from his corner. "Counting on the power of friendship? How very you, Ketchum. It's also incredibly naive. They'll turn you in the second you make contact." "Not if we're smart about it," Ash countered, turning to face his cynical new ally. "You have contacts, don't you, Paul? Back channels. Ways of getting a message to someone without the League tracing it." Paul met his gaze, a flicker of grudging respect in his eyes. Ketchum was learning. He wasn't just relying on blind faith anymore. He was using tactics. "It'll cost you," Paul said. "Fine," Ash replied without hesitation. "When we get the information we need, I'll show you what you wanted to see. A real demonstration of my power. Up close." The bargain was struck. A few hours later, using a heavily encrypted satellite relay from Paul's private network, they sent a short, untraceable message to Serena's public trainer profile. It contained only a set of coordinates for a remote, abandoned power plant in the Kalos Badlands and a single phrase: "The Rhyhorn racer needs to see the truth." It was a reference to Serena's mother, a message so personal only she would understand its significance. 2 days later, Ash stood on a rusted catwalk overlooking the cavernous, silent turbine hall of the abandoned Kalos power plant. The place smelled of dust and ozone, a ghost of its former energy. He was alone. Jessie, James, Meowth, and Paul were hidden, stationed at strategic points throughout the facility, a silent, watchful perimeter. This was a meeting built on a fragile hope, and they were preparing for betrayal. He heard the crunch of footsteps on the gravel outside. A moment later, 2 figures appeared in the massive doorway, silhouetted against the bright Kalos sun. Serena and Clement. Serena looked anxious, her hands twisting the strap of her bag. Clement looked terrified, his glasses perched on his nose, his eyes wide as he scanned the shadowy interior of the plant. His palm arm was twitching nervously on his back. "Ash?" Serena called out, her voice echoing in the vast space. "Are you here?" Ash stepped out of the shadows. "I'm here." They both flinched, startled. They stared at him, and he could see the shock on their faces. This was not the Ash they remembered. His hair was longer, his clothes were worn, and his eyes held a weight, a solemnity, that was entirely new. He stood with a quiet, powerful stillness that was more intimidating than any overt display of strength. "It's really you," Serena breathed, a mixture of relief and fear in her voice. "We got your message. We were so worried. The Aegis Division has a kill on-site order for you, Ash." Clement burst out, his voice a panicked whisper. "They're saying you've joined Team Rocket, that you're a threat to global security. Coming here is an incredible risk." "The biggest risk is not knowing what we're up against," Ash said, his voice calm and steady. He held up the data chip. "I need your help. This chip contains information from the Aegis Division's own servers. But it's encrypted. I need you to unlock it." Clement looked at the chip as if it were a venomous snake. "Ash, I can't. Aiding you would make me a criminal. My gym, my research, Bonnie." "Clement, please," Serena interjected, placing a hand on his arm. She turned her gaze to Ash, her eyes searching his. "What happened, Ash? At the party? Brock and the others, they said you lost control. They were scared." "They were," Ash agreed, a flicker of the old pain crossing his face. "And they had a right to be. But they were wrong about what they saw." He took a deep breath. "I need to show you. Not tell you." He led them deeper into the plant, to the base of one of the massive, defunct turbines. "Stay back," he warned. He closed his eyes, and for the first time, he willingly reached for the full ocean of power within him. He didn't try to heal or create. He just let the energy gather, a swirling vortex of blue-white light in the palm of his hand. The air in the plant crackled with ozone. The dormant machinery around them hummed to life, lights flickering on dead control panels. The ground itself seemed to vibrate with the sheer density of the power he was holding. Clement's eyes were wide behind his glasses, a torrent of data from his handheld scanner overwhelming its sensors. Impossible energy levels, it's stable, perfectly contained, this isn't a chaotic outburst, it's controlled. Ash opened his eyes, his gaze locking onto the multi-ton steel turbine. He didn't throw a blast of energy. He simply pushed. The orb of light in his hand pulsed, and an invisible wave of pure force rolled across the room. The massive turbine, which hadn't moved in 20 years, groaned in protest. Rusted bolts the size of a man's arm screamed and then sheared off, pinging against the far walls like bullets. With a sound like the world tearing in half, the entire colossal structure was ripped from its foundations and shoved 20 feet across the concrete floor, leaving deep gouges in its wake. Ash lowered his hand, and the light faded. The plant fell silent again, save for the creak of stressed metal. He was barely breathing heavily. Serena and Clement stared, mouths agape, at the displaced turbine, then back at Ash. The sheer, casual display of godlike power was beyond anything they could have comprehended. They finally understood the fear his other friends had felt. But they also saw what the others had missed, the absolute, pinpoint control. "You see," Ash said quietly. "It's not a disease. It's a part of me. And there's a reason I have it." He held out the data chip again. "The answer is on here. Please, Clement. Help me." Clement looked from the impossible scene before him to the desperate plea in his old friend's eyes. He saw the truth then. The League wasn't trying to help Ash. They were trying to cage a miracle. His scientific curiosity and his loyalty warred within him, and curiosity won. "Okay," he whispered, his voice trembling as he took the chip. "Okay." They set up in Clement's hidden, secondary lab, a place even the Lumio City authorities didn't know about. As Clement's fingers flew across his keyboard, his genius on full display, the encrypted files began to open, one by one. The first revelation was Sylvan's personal history. The files contained a classified incident report from over 20 years ago. The destruction of a coastal town called Bluefin. The cause, a rampaging Lugia. The report included a list of survivors. Among them was a young boy named Sylvan. His entire family had been lost. "My God," Serena breathed, looking at the grainy black and white photos of the devastation. "His whole life, his entire ideology, it's born from this. He's not a monster. He's a man trying to stop the hurricane that already destroyed him." The revelation painted their enemy in a new, tragic light. He was not a simple villain to be defeated, but a wounded soul on a misguided crusade. It made the conflict harder, more personal. Then came the second, more earth-shattering set of files. They weren't Aegis Division reports. They were older, much older. Scans of ancient texts, fragments of scrolls recovered from ruins in Sinnoh and Johto, cross-referenced with energy readings from the Spear Pillar and the Sinjo ruins. Clement's program began to translate the archaic dialects. As the words appeared on the screen, a story emerged. A creation myth. In the beginning, Clement read aloud, his voice hushed with awe, there was only the great silence. The murk. A perfect, peaceful non-existence. Then, a flaw appeared in the void. A single point of will. Arceus. The text described Arceus using its 1,000 arms to push back the murk, weaving the fabric of reality, creating space, time, and life. But it was an imperfect creation. The murk was not destroyed, it was only held at bay, a shadow cast by the light of existence, forever seeking to reclaim what was lost, to restore the perfect balance of nothingness. "It's not evil," Ash murmured, the memory of the vision from the Harbinger washing over him. "It's balance. The other side of the coin." The texts went on. "In times of cosmic imbalance, when the walls between what is and what is not grow thin, a vessel is born. A mortal soul infused with a spark of Arceus's own creative power. A living immune system for reality itself." The screen displayed a list of names, historical figures, some known, some lost to time, linked by strange energy signatures across millennia. Sir Aaron of the Ronia dynasty. A mysterious shaman from early Johto. And at the bottom of the list, a new name, blinking in red, Ash Ketchum. "You're not just a random kid who got powers, Ash," Clement said, his voice trembling. You're a reincarnation. A chosen one, for lack of a better term. Born into this era because the murk is close to breaking through." From the doorway, where she had been standing guard, Jessie listened, her expression unreadable. She had followed Ash here, trusted his instincts. But this was beyond anything she could have imagined. He wasn't just a powerful trainer. He was a cosmic entity in a teenager's body. The final file was the most chilling. It was a theoretical treatise, compiled by ancient Aura guardians. It detailed 2 possible ways to defeat the Merc. The first is the purification, Clement read, his face pale. Using the full, unrestrained power of the aura of creation to attack the Merc's source, to completely erase it from existence. But the texts warn this is incredibly dangerous. It would be like trying to remove a shadow without a light source. The resulting paradox could unravel all of reality. What's the second way? Ash asked, his voice tense. Clement hesitated, his eyes fixed on the screen. It's called the Great Seal. It's not an attack. It's a sacrifice. He continued reading, his voice barely a whisper. The vessel of creation can use their power to reinforce the walls of reality, to seal the cracks through which the Merc seeps. But doing so requires an immense, continuous expenditure of life force. The vessel would have to merge with the source of the breach, becoming a living lock. A permanent, eternal sacrifice to save the world. The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. Ash would become a living battery, a god in a cage, burning himself out over an eternity to keep the darkness at bay. To save a world that had thrown him away. Ash was silent. He looked down at his hands, at the conduits of this incredible, terrible power. He thought of his friends who had betrayed him. He thought of his mother, of Professor Oak. He thought of all the people, all the Pokemon, living their lives in blissful ignorance of the silent apocalypse waiting at their door. Was their safety worth his own existence? He thought of Sylvan, a man so broken by loss that he would cage a god to prevent it from happening again. In a twisted way, they were both being asked to make a sacrifice for the greater good. A slow, grim resolve began to settle in his heart. If that was the price. No. The word was spoken from the doorway, sharp and venomous. Jessie strode into the room, her eyes blazing with a fire that seemed to push back the sterile light of the lab. She walked right up to Ash, her fists clenched at her sides. Absolutely not, she snarled, her voice shaking with rage. Jessie, it might be the only way, Ash said quietly, not meeting her eyes. The only way, she exploded, grabbing the front of his shirt and forcing him to look at her. Don't you dare. Don't you dare even think about it. A world that asks you to die for it after it cast you out, hunted you, and called you a monster. That world isn't worth saving that way. It's not about what the world deserves. Ash argued, his own voice rising. It's about stopping that thing. Did you see what it did to the tree? What it will do to everything? I don't care, she yelled, tears of fury and fear welling in her eyes. I care about you. You think this is heroic? Sacrificing yourself? It's not. It's giving up. It's letting them win. The ones who betrayed you, the ones who hunt. You, and that thing from the void. You don't get to be their martyr. Her tirade stunned everyone in the room into silence. Clement and Serena stared, wide-eyed, at this fierce, passionate woman who was defending Ash not as a symbol or a hero, but as a person. Jessie's grip on his shirt tightened. Her voice dropped to a fierce, desperate whisper. I didn't pull you back from the brink just to watch you willingly throw yourself into an abyss. I didn't save you just so you could die for a bunch of people who weren't brave enough to stand by you. She finally let go, taking a step back, her chest heaving. There's always another way, you idiot. A third option. We just haven't found it yet. And we are going to find it. A way where you get to live. A way where we get to win. Her words, her passionate, selfish, and utterly loyal defiance, shattered the grim resignation in Ash's heart. He looked at her, at the raw, fierce love burning in her eyes, love for him, not for the hero or the vessel, but for the boy she refused to let the world break. She was right. Sacrificing himself wasn't a victory. It was the ultimate defeat. It was accepting the terms the universe had laid out for him. And he had never been one to follow the rules. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. The contact was an anchor, a promise. "Okay," he said, his voice quiet but firm, his gaze locked with hers. "Okay. We find another way." The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.